Good morning, everybody. It's 9:30, so I'd like to start our meeting of full council today, Thursday, the 8th of November. I'd like to welcome a member of the press here and also thank Russell for making the intrepid effort to get here today without the possible hope of getting back this afternoon, maybe. First of all, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? Okay, well, I would like to declare an interest in item 10, which the Vice Chair will take. Thank you. Item 2.
Chairman, can I just declare, I'm under the impression item 18 is now moving into part 1, so if that touches on staffing, I'll declare an interest at that point as my wife is employed in that part of the authority.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. To confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the Council of the Isles of Scilly held on the 2nd of October 2018. Could I please have a proposer that those are a true and correct record? Councillor Mumford proposing.
Second.
Councillor Sims seconding. All those in favour, please. Thank you. Chairman's announcements. I have a couple. First of all, we've received too many late reports recently and are therefore taking steps to change that situation so that members and indeed our community have sufficient time to consider the reports fully prior to full council. This will inform debate and assist good decision making. As you will be aware, there should be a minimum of 5 working days for these reports to be made available. With regard to full council today, the various late reports have been consulted on with officers and members, and I have decided to defer agenda items 11 and 14. However, I consider it appropriate for late report agenda items 15 and 16 to be considered by members and debated. These agenda items, however, may be deferred for decision or deferred altogether if that is the consensus of members. The next announcement I'd like to make is just with reference to the public meetings that we're holding shortly. I would like to announce that on Monday, the 19th of November, we will be on Briar at 1300 and Tresco at 1500. On Tuesday, the 20th of November, we will be here on St Mary's at 1730. On Wednesday, the 21st of November, we will be on St Agnes at 1400. And on Thursday, the 22nd of November, we will be on St Martin's at 1400. One of the main reasons for mentioning this at this stage is that obviously we wish our community to try and turn up in the best numbers that they can in order to bring forward their issues to us at those meetings. But it is also an opportunity for them to question us members and officers with regard to smart islands especially, which seem to have been getting a lot of social media recently. And I would, although everybody is entitled to use social media, I would encourage our committee and members to actually deal with that outside of social media, because although it can be circulated on social media, it is better that the community talk to members so that the members can refer their concerns to officers and actually get some clarity on the situation. This also applies to budget setting. We're in the process of budget setting, as you're all aware at the moment, and it would be good to get our community's feedback into the initial thinking behind our budget setting at the present time. So please encourage the community to attend as best you can. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 4, which is questions under Standing Order 14. I have none. Item 5, to consider reports from committees, including receipt of minutes and drafts for information. I'm not sure that we have reports from committees. So we'll move on to item 6. Yeah. So do you want to deal with that now?
Ask Avril and Steve what? Avril and Steve would normally present their draft reports.
Yeah. Councillor Mumford, do you want to offer your report now?
Well, this is still in draft form, I believe, and Bob's away at the moment. So I think these will come for recommendations to the December Council, if that's all right with you, Chairman.
Yeah, no, that's what I thought. Thank you very much. What about licensing? Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I believe this is also in draft form.
Yeah.
And so therefore the same will apply to this as from Avril.
I thought that was the case. Sorry, that's why I stumbled on that. So we've got item 6 on the agenda, consider motions in accordance with Standing Order 12. I have none. Item 7 on the agenda is member updates. Can I have any member updates, please? Councillor Sims.
I haven't really got much of an update because this whole meeting really is full of infrastructure stuff. I just wanted to say how pleased I am that the recycling is finally coming to St Mary's. I'm sure there will be snags ahead, but it's been a very, very long, bumpy road, and we've gone up a number of cul-de-sacs. But compared to 2013, when I came on to the council, the situation has been completely transformed. So congratulations to all the team, all the work that's gone on in the background, and the guys on the coalface who are actually implementing it. So just well done, everybody.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chair. I've reported to members on the leadership board that, with your good self, I attended since the last meeting. That meeting of the leadership board contained an update on the progress of the integrated care system, a small report from Alison Hernandez about the fact that the police merger wasn't going ahead, and an interesting report from Rob Rochelle, the lead member for adults for Cornwall Council, about their extra care housing, which I have asked him to come and tell us about at some point. Since then, both the chairman, myself, and the lead member for adults have attended a project board, health and social care project board on the Isles of Scilly, and we will continue to be present as many of these meetings as we can. I've also recently attended Cornwall Partnership Trust meeting, where we had an interesting presentation on risk management, and members will also be pleased to note that we were also informed of the good progress of the building, the project that is going to build an adolescent inpatient mental care unit at Bodmin. This obviously will impact greatly on better outcomes for young people with mental health issues, since the outcomes when sent out of county and away from family support are obviously not as good as when adolescents and young people can remain close to home. Thank you.
Any other member updates? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Much of what I wanted to say is within the notes I have circulated. Just on top of that, our elected Member of Youth Parliament is due to fly out this morning to attend the annual sitting at the House of Commons, where hopefully he'll be able to participate. And we have Children's Trust Board next week, where he's hopefully going to give some feedback on that. We've also got the first meeting of the Ascend Programme Board next week, which should hopefully drive some progress forward in that particular part of the agenda. I attended the One Vision Partnership Board last week, and following on from what Councillor Grottick said, we've got the Health and Wellbeing Board next week, where mental health is going to be discussed, I think, in some detail as well. So that sort of builds into that conversation as well.
Thank you. I would also mention at this stage that we are going to consider the lead member reports under this item as well. I don't know why they found their way into part 2. Again, we did agree that we were going to deal with lead member and member reports all in part 1. So if any member has any questions to do with the 2 lead member reports that are attached, then do please ask at this stage. Okay, Councillor Mumford.
Could I ask Councillor Williams, when we did a surgery on St Martin's, Christine Saville asked about the 2-year-olds whose parents are on low incomes or on benefit. Has provision been made for them for their free nursery places? Do you know that? I did have a quick word with Keith yesterday, but...
What did Keith say?
He said that they were, but I just wanted, Christine actually asked me to ask the question, so that's what I'm doing.
I've certainly got no knowledge that there's been any change to the current circumstance with 2-year-olds. And also one of the agenda items last week at the One Vision Partnership was around universal credit and how we support families on low incomes and individuals on low incomes and the rollout of that. And I'm under the impression that there's also been work with local staff around that to make sure that local families are supported as well as they possibly can do. But obviously the 2-year-old funding in its ethos is to encourage or allow parents to be able to work and to give children some socialisation and some early education. So I'm very supportive of continuing that as we go forward into budget conversations.
So it's obviously been taken on by one of the other childminders, I presume?
Yes. So the 2-year-old funding for people on low incomes is a statutory offer, but currently in the Isles of Scilly we make it available to every single 2-year-old living on the islands.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to report from the chair that I attended Transport Board and Sponsor Board in Truro this week. I'm pleased to report with regard to the Transport Board that the focus now that this has been reinvigorated is wholly on the user and not operators. We are taking a completely fresh look at the Transport Board. The Island Partnership and our lead member for Place are now will be sitting on the newly invigorated board. There will be a new stakeholder group formed, which will include all stakeholders, for example, medical transport, inter-island boating, and so on, so that all stakeholders will have a platform to be able to feed into the Transport Board. At the present time, there is a draft paper going to be put together of the improvements that our users, i.e. our community and our visitors, are requesting so that we actually get a more robust, reliable transport service in future. Those requests are being considered and are going to be reported to the board in December. In January, there will be a stakeholder group consultation. The new stakeholder group will consult on these improvements, and there will be a public meeting in February to consult on it as well, before a paper is brought to full council with recommendations, and that will be the way in the future that full council will deal with recommendations at Transport Board. So that will be ratified by full council, which I think is a big step in the right direction. I'll just briefly talk about Sponsor Board, and then I'll welcome questions on either. The meeting of the Sponsor Board, which if you're not entirely aware of, because it's not spoken about a lot, but is actually the collaborations that we have mainly with Cornwall. As you know, there were some historical ones in place, and over the last few years we have had more collaboration, clearly with our finance and IT and so on. Any future collaborations are going to be worked up now by the steering group of the sponsor board, which is mainly officers, and they will look at what might be advantageous to us, and work up a business case for those, and it will be discussed at the next sponsor board early in the new year. And any further collaborations which we feel might be worthwhile and appropriate for Scilly will then be put before you in a paper, so that you can decide whether indeed they are appropriate or not. So that's the status at the moment of the Transport Board and Sponsor Board. Does anyone have any questions for me? Councillor Marcus.
Chairman, is the Transport Board can be open to members of the public? Are minutes going to be available for the public to review?
I don't think that is the case.
Why not?
I'll hand over to the Chief Executive, who is the Chairman of the Transport Board.
Thank you for the question. The issue with the Transport Board is that at some point we need to share some commercial confidential information in relation to the operations of the transport system. And it wouldn't be appropriate that that information is in the public domain until decisions have been agreed and until packages have been agreed how that information can be used. So there will definitely be very much improved communication coming out of the Transport Board, but the meetings will not be in public.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
The Transport Board, will we know exactly who the people are who are sitting on this board?
Yes, I can tell you at the present time, the chairman of the board, and that's been ratified by the board for the forthcoming year, is our chief executive. Also sitting on the board is Mark Dudridge, the chairman of the LEP. Sitting on the board is Robert Dorian Smith on behalf of Tresco Estate and forthcoming operator. Also sitting on the board is Stuart Reed, the acting manager of the steamship company. And also sitting on the board is myself as chair of council. And finally sitting on the board is Nigel Blackler, who is the strategic transport officer for Cornwall. But as I mentioned earlier, Steve Sims, our lead member for Place, is also now going to join that board, as we decided in our corporate plan. And we have also had agreement that David Jackson, the executive officer of the Islands Partnership, will also sit on the board.
Thank you. And the Sponsors Board.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one. Chris Gregory sits on the board also on behalf of the Duchy of Cornwall.
And the Sponsors Board, is that open to the public?
No, I don't think so, is the answer. The Sponsor Board, I can tell you who sits on that. Basically, I chair it as chairman of the Council of the Isles of Scilly, and Julian German, who's the deputy leader of Cornwall Council, is the vice chair. I'm trying to find my papers here at the moment. Sorry, you've caught me on the hop for a minute. But
that's all right. Not. I was just wondering whether it's going to be in the public, and whether will you bring a report from the Sponsors Board? You said that the steering group is going to be Doing the business cases, is that right?
Yeah, I'll hand over to Teo because the officers actually lead the
Right,
steering
okay.
group.
Shall I clarify a little bit? The governance that was in place for the collaboration agreement comprises the sponsor board, which includes political representation, and hence that we do have the deputy leader of Common Council and the chairman of the Council of the Isles of Scilly, and they actually chair the sponsors board. The minutes of the sponsors board and the report from the sponsor board will come back to each respective council. So on a regular basis, either annually or biannually, your chairman, as the chairman of the sponsor board, will bring a report to full council to report back on progress, report back on some of the challenges, and very importantly, will report back on proposals for future collaboration. And it will be for each respective full council, or each council, I should say, to determine whether those proposals are valuable for the collaboration and whether they would be valuable for each respective council to pursue. Once each council has determined the list, and when we will then as officers work up the business cases and the models that will be taken forward into the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. In terms of the transport board, if it's helpful, I'm very happy to share the terms and reference of the transport board amongst members, because I think that provides really good oversight on some of the changes, but also some of the vision we're trying to build into transport board.
Have we already had the terms of reference for the sponsors board?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't scrutiny.
But it's my report to you is quite early because the sponsor board and transport board were only on Tuesday, so the minutes are not yet out. I just really wanted to tell you that that's been done, and we've reinvigorated the transport board and indeed the sponsor board, because although I'm chairman of it, the sponsor board has not met since May when I became chairman. So we were very concerned that actually this was slipping, and so we've now reinvigorated that, as it were, as well. But you will get minutes of both the sponsor board, and minutes for the transport board. Yeah, as when they're out, which will be in a few days, hopefully. We'll circulate that to members.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Smith.
Well, if I may, just a very brief update on AONB, if I may.
Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't make the last AONB meeting, but the brief actions out of it were that the Isles of Scilly AONB will make an official representation to the National Review of Protected Landscapes, which is quite an important document. It's the first time really that the AONB's national parks have been reviewed properly in a very long time. So Julian Pearce will be working on that one in collaboration with other members of the partnership. And just briefly on our the position that we voted on to ban balloon and sky lantern releases a few months ago, it's looking positive that other landowners on the Isles of Scilly might be moving towards taking up that position, so which we're trying to push through the AONB. So I think that was a very positive action that was started here and will have a good knock-on effect. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. I'll move on to item 8, which is urgent items. I meant to mention this under Chairman's announcement, so I'll do it now. It is just to remind everybody that on Sunday, it is the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, which the British Legion here and ourselves and many others are going to be obviously at this commemoration. And I would urge as many of you as possible to attend. The first ceremony is at, well, you need to muster at 10:45 in the park garden first, and then it moves to the Methodist chapel for the service at 11 o'clock, followed by a procession to Old Town, to the original memorial after the service. The council and others will be laying wreaths at both memorials. But as I say, it would be very opportune to remember all those who gave their lives by turning out on that day, if you possibly can, please, and encouraging as many of the community to do so as well. We have actually made a charitable donation which goes to mental health for ex-servicemen and women, which was in the form of a statue, a 7-foot Tommy, which is supposed to be appearing here on the islands, promised by the 8th of this month, but as yet we can't find Tommy. But all being well, even if we can strap him in the co-pilot seat of a plane on Saturday, we will try and get him here. But seriously, I would urge you please to try and attend on Sunday. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is planning application P18069, and I'll hand over to Lisa, planning officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. This is an application to site a small shed adjacent to the existing reservoir on Vane Hill, Tresco. Structure is 2 meters by 3 meters, timber shed to house auto-dosing chlorine for the island's water supply. As you'll note from the report, the proposal, whilst adjacent to the existing reservoir structure, and as such would be seen within this context, it is close to 3 scheduled monuments comprising 4 Bronze Age platform cairns. It's therefore a recommendation to monitor groundworks to ensure any archaeological remains are recorded. In order to offset the harm, there is a recommendation to carry out scrub clearance on the monuments, and subject to these conditions, it's recommended that the timber shed would be acceptable and the application is recommended for approval. And these are some photos of the reservoir, which it will be sited next to. Members are asked, however, to delegate the precise wording of the scrub clearance condition to the senior manager to ensure it is appropriately timed to take place whilst the construction of the shed takes place, rather than requiring the equipment before it's first used. So that's just, any questions?
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think the application is fine per se. I think it's a sort of happy outcome that we can encourage some, clearance of scheduled monuments. I just wonder whether there's any kind of tying to any longer term management of, keeping those clear.
We did consider a condition that required annual maintenance, but it was felt that that was a disproportionate requirement of what is essentially quite a small proposal. So getting it cleared initially was the best we felt we could achieve and proportionate to what they're doing.
Yeah, sure, understandable. Perhaps we could just encourage them to do so. Slightly pedantic question, but I couldn't work out the colour of the material of the roof on the shed. Just thought that might be an issue in terms of its prominence. And if we can't find it, then can we check the condition that it's suitably sort of hidden in the landscape, if you like?
Yeah, it is next to a big white block, isn't it? So it's kind of, it just doesn't really,
It's called a pent roof, just for information. The shed has a pent roof with the following dimensions, which are there. Sits on a concrete base, and the timber will be stained Sadolin Lignum Vitae, which is a browny green stain.
So essentially a sort of timber roof as well? Is that what it's?
I don't know what a pent roof is, if I'm honest, so I can clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marcus. No. Any further comments?
There's no further comments. I propose a recommendation.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Guy. All those in favour? Thank you, that's carried. And I'm going to hand over to the Vice Chairman now for the next item.
Right, we move to agenda item 10, which is planning application P/18/073/FUL 9 Littleporth. So again, I'll hand over to the officer concerned.
Thank you. This is an application for alterations and extensions to this existing end terrace dormer bungalow. As you'll note from the report, the proposal contains a number of changes, which include an increase in the overall height by 700 mil, alterations to the first floor dormer windows on the front, alterations to the ground floor windows on the front, and to the rear, an increase in the size of the existing flat roof extension, together with the construction of a pitched roof above. The proposal also loses a bedroom and goes from a 4-bedroom property to a 3-bedroom property with 2 ensuite rooms in the roof and a ground floor bedroom. Consideration has been given to the design and scale of the extensions and the proposal, and it's considered on balance that the development is acceptable, and although large, it will result in a positive change to the appearance of the property to the benefit of the conservation area. I would just add that there is an omission with conditions to remove permitted development rights, which would be condition 5. So subject to that, the application is recommended for approval. Go through the pictures.
Sorry, Lisa, can you just explain that last bit again?
Sorry, there was, I meant to put a condition on to remove future permitted development rights.
Which means that?
Which means that it takes away the right to extend the property without planning permission.
Okay.
So.
Councillor Guy.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A vast improvement, in my opinion. I'd like to approve the recommendation. Propose it.
Right, we've got a proposal to approve. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Smith, did you wish to say something?
I just wanted to make a point, please. Yeah, I think as Councillor Guy says, it is an improvement to the property. I'd just like to bring up the issue of energy efficiency and sustainable design, as discussed with the planning officer before. I personally think it'd be prudent for us to recommend that any improvement work is not to the existing property, any improvements are pegged to current building regulations in terms of sustainable design and energy efficiency measures. I think we have a housing stock on the islands which is really not very energy efficient. I think anything we can do to improve that situation is in our power. I think would be a good thing to do. So I'd recommend a further condition that the planning officer discusses with the applicant improvements in the energy efficiency on the extension, the new work that's going to be carried out here.
I wonder if we could have a comment from the officer, please. I think it is obviously a delicate balance. We are moving forward with a local plan in which we would take every possible chance to encourage people to do that, but there is a fine balance sometimes with the financial implications of insisting and enshrining it in the approval. I think that might be a little bit difficult.
I mean,
Ms. Walton.
I can certainly, if you're happy to delegate the wording of any conditions to the senior manager, and we can certainly have a conversation, because what we have to do is agree in writing with the applicant any pre-commencement conditions. So I don't see there's any harm in, before the application expires, having the conversation to see if the applicant is willing to go above and beyond building regulations with the extension. But if they are reluctant to do so, I don't think we would refuse the application if they weren't happy with that condition.
Yeah, I would be happy with that.
Fine. Then the original. Oh, sorry, Councillor Legg.
Thank you. In paragraph 26, you talk about emerging policies and increasing up to 40% of original dwelling. Although this property, as you've calculated, is only an increase of 29%, could you just explain whether that's over the original construction of the building or over the building as it stands currently?
The calculation is as it currently stands, so not as it was originally built, because I didn't have those plans to work those out. I did it on the basis of what's there now and what this will add.
So just working that forward, thinking about sort of future planning applications, could you continuously extend a building?
No, I mean, the point of policy LC9 in the emerging draft plan is to look at what the original building, not any subsequent extensions. So you always go back to as it was in 1948, or as from the time it was built.
Thank you.
What we're intending to do moving forward is to get a local validation checklist that will require applicants to make these calculations as part of their application, to say this is what it currently is, this is what I'm going to make this whole process easier, and obviously to make applicants think a bit more carefully about actually don't go that big.
Councillor Sims.
On that point, I mean, I cannot really see any way of doing that without tying it to the oldest plans you've got, because you can't say it can be 40% bigger than some plans that no longer exist.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and it can be quite crude heuristic to do it by, you've gone over. So it is just a bit of discretion and a bit of common sense. Yeah.
Right, unless anyone else has any other questions or comments.
Vice Chairman, if I may, can we just clarify, the presentation says 9 Parsons Field.
It is 9 Littleporth.
Yeah,
sorry.
Just so we don't trip over ourselves in the future.
Sorry.
Right, is everybody comfortable to proceed? We have a proposal to accept the recommendations.
Sorry, can I come in then, Vice Chair, please? Hello?
Yes, sorry, Matt, please contribute.
So I don't think, just listening to the debate, I don't think the proposal is to accept the recommendation. Lisa mentioned also the inclusion of the conditions to remove future commercial development rights. And there's also the suggestion of delegation to the planning officers to seek agreement with the applicants over a condition related to energy efficiency.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like that's the proposal and not what was recommended in the report. So I just want some clarity over that.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. So we're actually approving the recommendation, removing the permitted development rights and agreeing that the officer will have a conversation with the applicant about encouraging future energy. Sorry, would you like to phrase what you requested, Councillor Smith?
Improved energy efficiency.
All energy efficient measures as appropriate, or as many energy efficient measures
as possible
as we can into the extension. Not the original building. Sorry, is that clear? Would you like perhaps, for clarity, to read your recommended approval proposal, Lisa?
So the recommendation as originally set out was they approve it subject to the conditions, which were conditions 1 to 4 in the report. It's now approve it subject to conditions 1 to 5, with the 5th condition being removal of permitted development rights. And before the decision is issued, a conversation with the applicant to increase energy efficiency measures with the extension, which if the applicant is in agreement with, we would add a 6th condition and issue the decision.
Right. Right, Councillor Barry,
I'm happy to propose that recommendation with the...
I will second that.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Would somebody like to let the chairman know? Thank you.
Sorry, agenda item 11, we have decided to defer, as we mentioned earlier, and we will be having an interim meeting with regard to the capital programme before it's considered at the December full council. Item 12 is the second quarter 2018 financial report in the hands of our 151 officer. Thank you, Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you've got the second quarter to the end of September report there. There's quite a bit in this report, so I'll take you through any questions. If you want to ask them, I'll try and answer them as I go through. The report is set out in the first instance. There are a series of budget environments that are set out there in Appendix A. They are quite significant, and I think members are perhaps slightly concerned of why there are so many, so I'll just take you through what we're trying to achieve here. As part of closure of last year's accounts, looking at the budget setting process we're in and trying to carry on the journey of improving the control function, we've started doing a deep dive into some of the budgets. In doing so, we found that there's a series of recharges that seem to exist between various budgets, which are quite historic in some places. There's little or no substance, or they haven't been updated recently. That also creates the fact that you're moving budgets internally just between budget headings, and you're moving them away from where the budget holder who has control of that spend, where that's actually being reported. So transparency is lost to a certain extent. There's a series of other costs which were just arbitrarily spread across every budget heading, and this is what I'm going to here are things like the insurance bill, which was just spread across a number of headings. Again, I think it may have had good substance a number of years ago, but it's not been kept up to date. There's also an issue that we don't really need to do that. It's probably far better to keep the insurance line in totality against insurance so that we can manage it appropriately rather than spread it thinly across every budget that exists in the authority. There's the pension deficit, which has done the same. It's just been spread across every budget heading, so we're pulling back that being a central area. As I say, there was a lot of support service charges out to what have previously been sort of defined as trading accounts, which is the airport, water and housing. As I say, those budget holders who run those don't have any control of those support service recharges, so there's an element of let's manage support services where support services fits, and the managers can manage the airport, housing, water on the costs that they can control and they can authorise. And there was also some grants that I think when setting the budget last year, they were arbitrarily treated as a central resource, which in essence, under the Code of Accounting, should be treated within the services. So we've tried to address and put that right within this report. Those are all set out in Appendix 1. Probably the one I didn't mention was obviously there was also some reserve movements which were buried around. We've tried to pull those out so that they are more transparent, and they're down near the bottom of the budget report. So in essence, it has a significant change, but I think it is part of the journey we're on to try and make those budgets more transparent, clearer, the control environment better, that people actually have a budget allocated, which is the costs that they are accountable for and the costs that they control, and it doesn't include bits that are just spread arbitrarily across
headings from other central budgets. And as I say, it also then gives a clear, transparent view of some of those other costs which have been spread and makes some of those budgets look lighter than in fact they actually are. So that's what we're trying to achieve. That's created that number of environments. If you then take that forward into the budget monitoring position at the end of September, which is then set out in Appendix 2, obviously by resetting budgets, that has probably created a few new variances in the budget. Some of those we're doing further analysis on. The main variances at the moment, particularly around active city, which is showing a significant underspend, mainly in the salary area. There's some big variances in fire and rescue and the airport, but those are areas that I think there's further work required because the allocation of some of the costs between fire and the airport is needs a thorough investigation because the two are tied up very, very closely, and it is causing us a few issues trying to get to the bottom of that. I think we've managed probably to move the budgets around. Probably need to look at where some of the costs have been coded in the first half of the year. Bearing that in mind, we're still showing a revenue underspend, and I have to say in paragraph 3, it says 45, it is actually 49,000 underspend. That's down from the 70,000 you had at the end of the first quarter, but you have had the cut back budget monitoring reports in subsequent meetings, which have been showing an underspend in the region of 45, 46,000. So we're still showing that position. The graph at the top of the page, at the following page, which page 81, I think it is, shows that the variance is fairly static in totality for the organisation, around just under the 50,000 mark. I think there's some prudency that we've put in there. I'm expecting that may increase as we go through the second half of the year.
Just to see if it's you.
Is it me?
I'm not sure.
Is it? Can you hear? Yeah. Sorted now? Dead one. Okay, thank you. You also see as we go down through that page, net spend to date. I think, as I've pointed out previously, we're in the infancy of trying to develop this report, but I think you begin to see that we are beginning to see what the trend of the spend is. There is a little bit blip down in August, slightly higher in September. We need to just ascertain exactly what that is, but some of that will be down to, I think, whether we've got all the accruals in place in August due to the holiday period and perhaps some of that not being completed. But I think if you start drawing a line from beginning of April, you begin to see that we are developing a trend that we will be useful in future years to measure against to see how our spend actually goes during the year. If I then move on, we've, as promised in a previous full council, we've now introduced a new table that actually tries to identify the budget, not just by the services, which is what's in Appendix A. We've now got a summary table here to try to identify it by the type of cost, which was requested previously. First time we've shown it, so it's a little bit warts and all. We probably need to refine it and do further work. But I think overall, you can see that employees is under, which is what we're expecting because the delivery of savings, which I'll get to in a minute, is being mitigated in most places by vacancy management. So you would be expecting the employee line to be underspending. So that is showing through, which is pleasing that it does show that. The supply services and third-party payments, this is an area, doesn't matter, I think, where you are in the country. The two headings seem to get a little bit mixed up in between the two in the allocation of actuals. So further work there, but you need to take those two added together really for the moment. Income is up. Again, I think when we start showing gross and net, previous experience I've had elsewhere is that it does start flushing out stuff that hasn't been recorded properly previously in the fact that items expenditure that are recharged on sometimes have not been included in gross expenditure, but both your gross expenditure and your income go up accordingly. But it is interesting. We'll do further analysis of that, but overall still leading to the position I said, which is forecasting a £49,000 underspend. Moving on, we've also introduced at the request, and it's part of the Transparency Code, the expenses for senior managers. Just like to point out that I think we got a slight misalignment here, that the expenses that are against the senior manager infrastructure and planning for July, August and September should have been up a line against the senior manager for strategy and development. We'll correct that going forward. And as I say, introduced for the first time, we'll keep that on the sheets going forward so you can see that and have that information. I did mention that on the forecast savings, we did the savings risk analysis in June. At that point, we analysed that we would probably only deliver 167,000 of the £216,000 worth of savings, albeit that we had mitigations elsewhere being delivered by senior managers. We've done a review recently as part of the looking forward in the future budget, and we've now reduced that down to 136,000 delivery, which means we're down from 77% to 63%. In doing that, I've also reviewed that originally in the model we assumed that anything rated as red would probably deliver about 15%. At the end of the first quarter, that was probably appropriate. You still have 9 months of the year to address those. After 6 months, I've reduced those to 0 because I think there's little or no chance that they will deliver within the year. So that's all feeding into there. Mainly when we get to the report, if you have any questions, but the ones that were identified as risk earlier are still red and have gone down to 0, as I said. There's one that was the delivery of the energy, which although we had all the ingredients in place, is becoming hard to actually deliver at the moment. So we've put that to red for the moment, which identifies a 0 delivery anticipated this year. So we'll probably be short rather than 49,000 by about 80,000. But as I say, we're underspending by 49, so we are mitigating that. But as previously stated, that is probably through staff savings in vacancy management, and that is in the longer term. There is a question of how sustainable that is, and we will need to address that looking at the budget for future years of whether those savings will come back online for next year or whether we need to find alternative sources of money elsewhere within the authority's budget. That is where we are generally on the budget. We then go through to the council tax collection performance here against the target. We're actually up. We've got a good collection rate, just under 60% at the half year, which is 3.7% higher than the profile target we used, and the same profile target that Cornwall Council used, because we're using their system now. And you can see that we've been regularly beating the targets month by month in the graph on the top of page 84. Business rate collection, although improved significantly from when we reported at the end of the first quarter where performance was poor, it has increased as anticipated over the next 3 months. It was still about 5% behind the target. Ironically enough, the majority of that relates to business rate demands on the council itself. There are a significant number of bills that the council has to pay business rates itself on. We paid the majority of those earlier in the year through a lump payment. We gathered all the bills together that we thought were there, and we made a single payment, but the three, I think there was 3 or 4 properties for some reason were missed off. They're being identified and will have gone through during October, but not September. If you actually add that back in, we would be pretty much on target. So I think from where we were at the beginning of the first quarter, we've got good performance, and I think going forward, you will see that we will be on target by the end of the third quarter. The water rates collection performance, here we should have collected, or total to be collected in the year is £756,000. We've collected just over 60% of that to date, leaving just under 300,000 to collect. So halfway through the year, we've collected 60%. So again, I think good performance, and we're on target to collect the full money for the year. Housing rent collection, again, good collection rate here. We've collected just under 310,000 to date. We've got a current balance outstanding of 26,000, and the collection rate of just over 92%. And we did bring forward £16,000 worth of balance of stuff outstanding. We're now at 26, but we need to now have a little bit of a push to bring that back. But I think, you know, we've now got transparency being reported to members and the public, so we can see what our collection rate is, and it is in a reasonably good position. The sundry debt position, which is all the miscellaneous debts, etc., that are collected, you'll see that this has improved quite significantly since the first quarter. The current balance is just shy of 510,000. It was 770 when we reported at the end of the first quarter, so that's come down significantly. But probably more importantly, of that 510, the amount overdue is 249,000. Okay, that is not an insignificant sum, but that was 437,000 at the end of the first quarter, so it's coming in the right direction, and I estimate that it'll come down further. There will be some write-offs probably required, because there are some elements in there that go back a number of years. We're doing a further investigation on those, and we'll bring those back at an appropriate time. But we are moving in the right direction and bringing the level of sundry debt down in the second quarter. On the treasury management activity, there's no activity to report back to members in the second quarter. We still have an underlying need to borrow due to our capital financing requirement, where over previous years we have spent or financed about £5 million worth of prudential borrowing. We haven't taken any external borrowing because we have borrowed that from within existing council's cash balances. That is not sustainable, as probably the previous Section 151 officer would have said, in the long term, but it is still sustainable at the moment in this year. But I don't think that we'll probably get much beyond this year, and we may need to actually borrow something within this year. There's already a delegation in place that you approved earlier in the year that's delegated to myself in conjunction with the chair if we do need to take out that borrowing. But at the moment our working capital is positive. But I do foresee in the second half of the year, as in most local authorities, that does dwindle slightly, because grants and income and things like business rates and council tax all come in the first half of the year, but our spend is spread more evenly over the year. So I think our working capital will erode slightly in the second half of the year, which means that we may have to dip in to make that long-term borrowing to bring our cash balance back up. But at the moment it's fairly positive going forward. I think that's my report, Chair.
Thank you, Russell. Councillor Sims.
I have a question regarding the table, page 82, paragraph 4.1. The employees' budget is actually slightly lower than supplies and services, and it's always been my understanding that essentially salaries are our biggest cost. I'm not querying it really. I'm just curious, because I don't wish you to disaggregate it, but it's runs contrary to what my previous thoughts were.
I think the reason, and this is what does flag up when you do this analysis, is that there are myths like that around. I think the salary of the net budget is a high proportion. There is other stuff that flows through the council, which isn't necessarily in your net budget, but the stuff that just flows through, like the school grant money and things like that, which isn't necessarily in salaries. But it does give you a more transparent view of what our cost base is going forward.
So essentially that's indicative of cash flow as opposed to specific revenue issues.
Not necessarily cash flow, but it is the issue that there is stuff that washes through the council's accounts, both with expenditure and income, where we get the grant in maybe and we pass the grant on to third parties. Therefore, your third party payments is a significant figure, which you probably don't identify with because we're just hosting some monies that we pass through.
Thank you for that. That's very useful.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to praise the quality of the report. I think it's a very clear guide through where we are with our spending. I think for me that's very encouraging. In terms of, I think the difficulty comes when we come to the budget requirements, and I've emailed you about this. I think the bottom line figure is encouraging, certainly. In terms of actually us being able to monitor the budgets by department, now of course is a big challenge because a lot of things have been thrown up in the air. Everything seems to have been adjusted, and so I felt like I had a good handle on sort of departmental spending and tracking the changes, the trends before, and I sort of don't now. But I accept your arguments of why it's been done. I'm just making that point. I think it's challenging now for us as members to actually follow that by department. Well, of course, yeah, by next quarter, hopefully, if we don't make any more changes, we will be able to track that now. Just a specific question on, on the actual revenue budget monitoring. So in paragraph 3.1, do you expect that position to change fastly? Are we thinking the underspend that is reported now is going to be carried forward more or less towards the end of the year?
It's a bit of the $64,000 question, but yes, I think at the moment I'm anticipating that we think that is a prudent position. We will underspend, and I think the underspend will increase as we go through the second half of the year. Experience is that we are always prudent in the first half. We identify where we have cost pressures, but some of those pressures don't necessarily sometimes come to reality. And obviously in some areas we get upturn in income, etc. That's my normal experience. I don't expect it to change here, although I wouldn't go to say that I'm expecting it to jump up significantly and solve a myriad of problems we may have going forward.
No, thank you. It's just to sort of assess what the sort of likely outcomes will be, but it seems to be on a good footing at the moment.
Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Chair. So the housing and homeless, water and sewage and airport trading accounts, we've rearranged money that rightly belongs in support services that was in them. The total from those accounts is about £200,000 more than what we've moved into support services. Is that extra £200,000 the money that's mentioned in a later item, or is it something else?
There are a number of smaller recharges around, which would have then meant that support services figure isn't a direct link, because there was things like insurance and pension deficits which were spread over a wider budget base. There was also the issue that there was the reserve movements that those services, those trading accounts were putting in, were also buried in those figures, which we've tried to bring those out now to make them more transparent at the bottom of the sheet, where there's about £300,000 from those services being paid into reserve. They were just within the trading accounts, and there wasn't real clear transparency on those.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. My question relates to this report, but also the subsequent one about sports halls and things. Active Scilly is showing an underspend of 138,000, which I'm assuming is a bit more than a few staff vacancies. And I think this is also the second year where it has had a significant underspend. So are we now looking at the true cost of what the service is rather than the budget figure we started the year with?
Yeah, I think that is the situation, is that I think as we're going on the journey, we are beginning to tease out these issues of what the true spend is in that area. The spend is a better reflection. The budget is probably an historic budget that's been carried forward for a number of years, and we probably, as part of moving forward into next year's budget setting, we probably need to review the active city budget and see whether that's the appropriate or whether it needs to be revised downwards to match what we think the reality is of a lower net spend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sims.
Two questions. One's very straightforward. Terminology. On Appendix A, budget variance, it's a word I've never seen. Is it the same as variation? Page 86, budget variance. Environments, I'm not quite... Sorry? Seen variance before. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I think it's just me. But the other question is, more holistically, we have moved a considerable distance in the last 18 months with this, and I would agree with Jonathan's comment that this report is very clear and very useful. But how close do you think we are to the end of the tunnel for getting the whole thing sort of straightened up? Because it certainly wasn't the case last year, and it seems to be vastly better this year.
I think, as I've alluded to, and actually you probably get a similar picture in the next meeting we have when we have the external auditors here to comment on previous year's accounts. We are moving in the right direction, but the journey is a longer one than perhaps people would like it to be. It's going to take a number of years before we really clearly get to the position where we have a strong control environment, we have real confidence and robustness behind some of the figures. We are better than we were last year, and last year was probably better than we were the year before. So I think we're improving, which is the good point. But I think the external auditors will be saying, particularly on the that position, we are moving, but we have some way still to go before we're in a position where they would remove their concerns when they're looking at our position.
Councillor Rogers.
I'd like to also echo support to Councillor Smith's comments reference to the report. And I think Councillor Sims unfortunately has stolen my thunder there. I was just wanted to make the point within Appendix C of the concern of basically the language in there of mainly error. Mainly we need more review, costs, further work is required. Again, coded in error. Mainly lots of ifs and buts and mainlys and presumings, and I think we've answered that question. I was saying we are getting there, but there's a long road to go yet.
Councillor Marcus.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, it's a good start for getting a good dashboard on the financial stuff. Just some a few questions. What's the difference between supplies and services and third-party payments? Is this a SIPFA thing? Can you change it to something that actually makes sense and is easy to understand?
I think we're probably, for reporting here, it might be best to add the two together. Supplies and services should be contractual services where you're actually buying, whereas third-party payments are where you're just making a payment over without a contract, without supply services. Some of those are where you make payments maybe to other local authorities or to maybe to the school, etc., rather than where it's a contractual where you're buying in a physical service. But it is always a very grey area, and I think maybe it would be better to add those two together in hindsight.
Yeah, okay. Also, just note the the savings trend downward is not great. It's worrying, and when that is also added to some of the commentary in Appendix C, you've got things like the transfer of housing assets to the MAT, in the active city, there's some more budget pressures there, I think. The infrastructure and planning, there's quite a lot of budget pressures there. Are those going to be in addition to what we're looking at for the savings reduction in total, or are they going to be extra that are going to be reported on at the end of the year?
I think there's a little bit work in progress there. Just pick up one on active city. Obviously, there might be a small reduction in the income that we're assuming at the moment around the sports hall charges, which is subject to a further report. But where we mentioned the plan, I think this is where there's further work required, because there is money from previous grants and in reserve. We need to ascertain whether some of that funding should be drawn down from the reserve, which would then mean that, yes, it wouldn't be a pressure at year end, but that's the point we're actually in, where we're doing that more deeper dive analysis now.
Yeah, just concerned that, you know, last year we took money from reserve and we said we wouldn't be doing that regularly, and now we're looking at doing it regularly. So
I think I would echo that we shouldn't just be drawing on reserve, on the general reserve, just generally propping up the budget, but where money has been specifically put aside for a specific reason in the reserve, you should then draw that out accordingly.
Okay, so the last question, just on services to our community. The Young People Service is reporting an underspend of 48,000 and adult services is a 39,000 overspend. Are they cross subsidising each other? That she as young people's paying for the adult services?
I think that these are the areas that we're doing the further work on, because it's perhaps the allocation of some of the central sort of the service overheads in there. We just need to make sure that they're identified, how we actually identify the senior managers' costs and appropriately charge that between the two, which may just change that. But the younger people one, some of that is the funding for the I think it's at the under fours where we are actually underspending in reality, and there is probably slight pressure in the adult service spend, which is consistent with what we're hearing both in the community and elsewhere in the country.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo Councillor Marcus's comments on the savings, yeah, I mean, I think when you consider the savings we haven't made from last year, the savings that we have to make next year, and the structural deficit, I think, you know, let's be clear, we're not out of the woods, are we? It's there's quite a serious situation with savings still to be made.
But I think there's two issues there just to mention. One, we mentioned the journey in terms of getting the control and getting a good, robust, transparent. We're on the journey on that. What I wouldn't like to mislead members is that despite what's probably being said maybe in the press and nationally from the Chancellor's budget, local authority are a long way from coming out of austerity, and the council will be facing significant challenges in future years as costs increase and resources reduce.
Just a very specific question, please, on paragraph 5, the expenses for senior managers. What does that actually include on expenses? Presumably not travel.
No, it will
actually. Sorry, Chairman. In my that £78 expense is actually a train ticket, so it was a return fare to Bristol. So I think members have to be clear on that. Sorry.
It is the expenses that any of those senior officers incur out of their own pocket, and then claim back retrospectively the following month or the following months that they've spent out themselves. If the travel or whatever has been booked, sent by the council on their behalf, then that won't show there.
Okay, I just think perhaps it's got limited value as it stands at the moment, so perhaps there's a discussion there to be had. Anyway, thanks for including it. Yeah, I just want to make a point on vacancy management. I mean, I think we've brought this up a lot. Clearly, there are vacancies, and that has impacted on the budget. I think I'd actually like to see a report come to us to say what is the current vacancies, what are they, and what does that mean in terms of financials for us, and what does it mean in terms of service delivery? I.e., if we have vacancies, can we effectively not fill those posts save money and still deliver services, or are services being impacted? Because to me, this is quite a big issue, and I think it's been one of the themes of why we've been underspent, essentially.
We probably can do a report back if you so wish. What I would probably suggest in the first instance is, as we start to go through, and I know that's not in a formal full council in the first instance, but as we go through the budget setting process for next year, and there are some informal meetings, I think we will get behind those numbers there in the first instance, and I think following those discussions we can then decide whether it's more appropriate to bring that back in a further report to full council at some time in the future.
Yeah, from my point of view, that would be fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for the report. I'd like to echo everybody else's thanks for the narrative, which is especially useful. And members have flagged, as we've worked through, many of the challenges, and obviously we're getting there, but we've still got a long way to go. And in a way, next year's reports will be easier to go through because we will have changed from a rather difficult base to a more secure base. So we'll be, if you like, comparing apples with apples instead of apples with pears. I'd like to just flag on page 82 and echo the comments made around vacancy management, because obviously at the moment we are carrying our vacancy management, and obviously this has got very grave implications for the viability of the general economy. We don't want to have too much vacancy management, want to deliver the services and try and have a good performing council with some good jobs within our portfolio. So hopefully we can move on from that. But we've got limited maneuverability to actually get additional income. I know it's something we keep discussing, but we can't really increase our income without, obviously, if we recognise the impact on the community if we were to increase our council tax right up to the limit every time. So we've got limited manoeuvrability. So thank you for the discussion. I think it's been really useful. And when we move forward the next time and we have the workshop on the capital programme, obviously that will impact on this as well. Speaking personally, and I hope everybody else would find it useful as well, I would like a bit more information at some point, possibly in a workshop scenario, of how we manage the trading accounts. Because obviously moving money from a trading account that was trying to generate a contingency fund for future expense has got dangers. And lastly, just to finish on page, I think we've got a typo about there's no reason why the adult services shouldn't actually, on page 90, I presume we mean again that there is no reason in the middle of the page why the service should not again report a balanced budget position. I think we've missed that word out. Thank you.
Okay, from the chair, if I could comment, please, Russell. I would also agree that this is a great step forward for us to have this amount of detail and clarity, and the narrative around it, and is much appreciated. Thank you. However, I do have some concerns, some of which have been pointed out by councillors previously, but not only concerns, confusion in some areas. I mean, we've got here on page 92 the £200,000 overspend in infrastructure and planning, and further down we've got under fire and rescue, forecast underspend is 130,000, and yet we seem to be overspent in fire in the fire department as well. So I don't quite understand whether we are actually overspent or underspent.
At the moment, the forecast is showing that actually we're underspending on the fire service by about 130,000, but we're actually overspending at the airport by 150. We think there's further work required there to sort out the fire service at the airport and the general fire service for
Yeah,
the island.
that's what's
It's
confusing.
all a bit mixed in together at the moment, and we're beginning to start pulling it apart. And I think this goes to show that there's further work there to actually, we think we've identified how the budget is set accordingly between the two. And you need to track back and make sure that the actuals have been coded where the budgets should sit now. Work in progress. It is a testing area that we're doing a lot of further work with both the airport manager and the senior manager in that area. At the moment, in my own head, I'm just thinking that the two added together are reasonably close. So some of it is just allocation of cost rather than we've got a serious financial position in one or the other. The overall service infrastructure and planning is overspending. Some of that is down to the waste area where we have had some under-delivery of the savings, but we have had some significant legal costs, which I think members are aware of in dealing with a contractual dispute earlier in the year. So that's feeding into the 200 as well.
And I think, Chairman, just to echo that also as well, because obviously we are accounting differently now because the trading accounts are actually within the revenue budget. And so traditionally things like sewage and water have always drawn upon their own reserves because obviously they have operated as trading accounts. So I think there's a lot of issues I think we still need to drill into, particularly in terms of the trading accounts and how that interfaces with the revenue budget.
Yeah, I do appreciate the comments regarding this, and I understand the issues that you've got, Russell. But we have a duty, obviously, to be watching these budgets very carefully, and especially after our history in this. And whilst we've made great progress and we've got a lot of information in front of us, it still worries me, especially with your comments just now, about it taking another 2 or 3 years before we actually are going to be comfortable with our situation. And I'm just wondering why this is taking so long and whether or not you can't get further help from the actual departments, whether they should perhaps be focusing much more on managing their finances. I mean, I look at the waste and recycling here, which says there's a forecasting a £71,000 overspend. And it goes on to say here that curbside recycling and Tresco residential collection service, both of which could impact on the full year outturn, but this is still not clear. Well, I'm sorry, but I don't understand how it's not clear. It should be quite clear what it costs us to pick up Tresco's waste. And it should be, quite clear what it costs us with curbside recycling. It shouldn't be rocket science. So I just wonder what your feelings are about that.
Well, firstly, in terms of the longer term position, when I say several years yet, we're improving year by year. We're getting better information. It is becoming more robust. We are still teasing out a number of issues. When I say a couple more years, and that would be the issue echoed, I think, by the external auditors, is from a position where we are currently to where you have all the financial controls fully embedded in the authority throughout. And when they mean embedded, they mean that they've been in place a number of years and have been tested and have been proven that they are robust. You can put the changes in today, but they won't have been deemed to be fully embedded until they've been in place for a number of years. So that is why I'm alluded to further time yet before we get to a full control environment that has been tested over a number of years to be robust, that it isn't just a flash in the plan where you've just concentrated for a small period in time to get your finances back under control, and as soon as you take your eye off of it, it disappears again. If you've got the right culture in place and the right controls in place and the right processes in place, it will be embedded and will continue. That is where both the staff and the external auditors and even the internal auditor will be saying is that takes time. It's not a criticism that it takes time and it just takes time for the culture to change when you've been in this position. In terms of the, specifically on the waste and recycling, yes, further work we're undergoing with the senior managers in this area to understand what the full cost is. We should be able to get to the full cost. I accept what you're saying, and I'm hopeful that we will bottom that out in the next few weeks, that what the true cost of those services are. I think so much work has been put in terms of trying to ascertain the budget's in the right place, that we haven't had sufficient time to address some of the issues that that did throw out by then moving those budgets around. A lot of work, and we had people over the last couple of days working with senior managers to try and address these issues.
Well, thank you for that, but I would end by suggesting that we really focus on this control environment, because I'm personally not happy that it's going to take so long. I think we need to really focus on getting this into good order in very short space of time, please. Councillor Marcus.
Sorry, just one last, if we're talking typos, I think natural resources and assets have just wiped the overspend by having 47,000 million underspend there. So maybe just want to check that one.
Thank you. If we have no further questions, can we move to the recommendations, please? Recommendation 1, that members approve the budget environments as set out in Appendix A. Do I have a proposer for that, please?
I'll propose that.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Sims. All those in favour? Thank you. Recommendation 2, that members note the second quarter financial report as at the 30th of September 2018, including the forecast savings position. I have a proposer, please. Councillor Rogers, seconded by Councillor Grottick. All those in favour? Thank you. Right, we move on to item 13 on the agenda, which is the fee for use of the Queen Elizabeth II Sports Hall by Five Islands Academy, page 97, a report of Senior Manager Strategic Development.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report relates to the final piece of the jigsaw, if you like, for the academisation process that the school seems to be going through for an endless amount of time. But we draw towards the end of that process now. And one of the sticking points has been the discussion around the use of the sports hall, which, as you'll recall, was built partly with education funding and partly with Sports England funding. And the use has always been split between the school and the community. So the discussions that have been taking place since March have been around what that rental payment's going to be. If the council continue to run the sports hall, what's a fair and equitable rent? We've had long discussions, and the final resolution from the Academy is in front of you now. And the proposal from the Academy is that they pay £15,000 per year for the use of the facility. That's quite a significant drop from the existing arrangements, where the rental income from the school has been around about the £36,000 a year mark. In part of the discussions, what we said is, if the rental income's going down because they cannot afford it, then is their usage going to reduce at all? And part of the discussion has been around whether there's any opportunity within this discussion around creating better community use within the daytime. So the discussion has now revolved around the reduction in hours of the school usage to allow lunchtime use by the community. So between 12 and 2 o'clock, the facility will become available for community use. So whilst the income's going down from the school, it creates an opportunity for us as part of Active City to generate additional activities in that time. It will create a budget pressure, and we have worked with the school to start thinking about what the opportunities might be from this, what I call a crisis. From crisis comes opportunity and challenge, doesn't it? So what are we going to do about it as a budget pressure, not only this year, but moving forward? So there are a number of things. We can look at costs, and if you look at the costs of running the sports hall, The main cost is really around rates. There's not a lot we can do about that, but there are things around the gas and the electricity bills that we may be able to look at. So that we'll be looking at the costs of running that facility. But I think more importantly, it's about how we pull this together in terms of health and well-being and create perhaps a different target audience, not just for the sports hall, but the active silly activities as well. So I'm hoping to come to talk to the Health and Wellbeing Board about some funding that Sports England have provided for families funding, which is about bringing inactive families back into the family of activities, if you like. And it might be using the sports facility, but it might be doing other activities as well. We also want to look at whether there's a market for use of exercise classes and gym for older customers, looking at the population profile. So doing some profile work at the moment around who is using the sports hall, when are they using it, when's the peak hours, when the peak season, when the peak days. And from that, we're pulling together an action plan for activities moving forward from this next financial year. So what's popular, what's not so popular, who's using it, who isn't using it, more importantly. So there are recommendations there that might seem on the face of it quite challenging, but the team and myself are keen to explore how we'd be able to fill the gap in income through additional activities, some reduction in costs, but primarily looking at additional income from activities for the whole of the community. So the recommendations are in three parts. First is around the fees for the school for the next financial year, which is reducing to 15,000. We note the challenges for this coming year and next year that require. I think in the report, in recommendation to it says savings, but I think I'll probably add to that an increased income. And the third recommendation relates to a reduction from the academisation date, which I think is, Bashin's left, but I think it's scheduled for the 1st of December. So the reduction in income for this year as well, from £36,000 to £30,000, which you heard from Russell should be accommodated within our existing budget. Thank you, members. Any questions?
Thank you, Nicola. Councillor Sims.
Well, I would personally, I'd like to just propose all three. And regarding, I agree with Nicola, the £15,000 is quite a severe reduction. However, having discussed this reasonably extensively with Nicola, the negotiations have been very long, quite extensive and very tenacious. And I do think both sides now have fortified positions, and I don't think there's any mileage in continuing to try and get a better deal for the council or for the school to go the other way. So on that basis, I can't say I'm particularly happy with 15,000 plus VAT, but I think that is the situation we're in, and I don't think we're going to be able to move away from that.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would agree with everything Councillor Sims has said. It's not a welcome budget pressure at all, especially given our current situation. But on the other hand, it's a pragmatic solution to a long-running saga. And as Councillor Sims said, a lot of people have put a lot of work into this. We've got ongoing costs at the moment of the school not moving forward with academisation, but more than that, we've got uncertainty for parents who would really like, I think, to get this whole situation resolved. And so I'd be very happy if that was a proposal from Councillor Sims. I'd be happy to second the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, I'm frustrated by this, adding extra pressure onto the budget. Already, I think it's a bit short-sighted from the academy and from the DFE, because this money will have to be saved from council services elsewhere. So could this, and part of these savings will probably be as part of our delivery to young people. So what they're taking away with one hand, we are going to have to take away with the other hand as well. So to say that we're going to mitigate stuff is they're just passing the buck to us, really. And the reduction, so there's various points here. So is any other business allowed to just reduce their contribution, their bill by 20% in a year without having any evidence or backing to do that? As a question to the 151 officer, maybe, or whoever.
Just come back in terms of the guidance and advice that the school have been given is from the Department for Education, and they have looked at rental contributions for similar schools in different situations around the country, and their normal rental requirement is usually in the range of £6,000 to £8,000. So they expect a school of this size to be paying that sort of money for the community use of a facility. So they've been guiding the school in those negotiations, and that's been the difficulty, I think, in that we have raised the fact it costs more to run services over here, that this is the position we've reached.
Yeah, and as a councillor, we've got to look after the totality in our budgets as well, and look in the totality. So my frustration is probably with the Department for Education more than the people on the ground here, and their probably lack of understanding is probably a polite way of putting it, really. So this is the final negotiation stance then from both sides. It's just, I think, again, just needs to be reiterated that this will be, the impacts of this will be impacted on the budget and probably service delivery for people on the island. So, yeah, and in terms of the mitigations, i.e. increasing services, those, I imagine Active City had a business plan already. What is the usage of the court at the moment? What kind of figures are we looking at? And because you're in the paper, you're looking at a 3,400 extra income. So what does that look like in terms of usage compared to what we're using now? And I'm just wondering if this, is slightly optimistic in terms of the rent.
Yeah, so I think it's about how we promote and use the facility as much as anything. So at the moment, we don't have 100% usage of our facility. And there's probably not an appetite within the community to use our facilities for 100% of the time. I think what's really important is understanding what customer needs are now, what customer needs might be in the future. So if you expect, these figures have been based on, I would say, a best guess with good marketing. So potential income around those lunchtime activities is set out in the report, and that's based on not 100% use, not 0% use, but somewhere in the middle. And I think that whether we're successful in doing that or not will depend on how we market that and how we are proactive with our community in encouraging health and well-being across all age sectors. So it's partly within our own gift to change that proportion that's there at the moment. So there's already existing capacity to use a sports hall outside of the hours that have been used at the moment. So we know it's not used 100% of the time. We're monitoring that, we're looking at when the peak hours are, but then we need to think about, well, if it's available on a Saturday afternoon or on a Sunday afternoon and it's not been used, who might be that clientele? So I don't think we have that intelligence yet, and that's the work that we're doing this year to inform an action plan moving forward. So I think we've been a little bit complacent perhaps, and that we've sort of settled into a routine of, well, we've got this much income. As you said, the budget's been quite generous, it's not been an issue. So I think now we have an issue, and I think it's absolutely right to set a different business proposition moving forward. And regardless of what happened with the school, I think it's really important that all our services are as efficient and effective as possible, and in particular Active Scilly, which has such an impact on the health and well-being of our community. So I think there's a real, this is a catalyst, I think, for change and a different attitude towards how we go about promoting the activities that we have within our gifts. So I think that the team are up for that. The team are looking at different types of activities that might be promoted across a whole age range, rather than just the target age range that we have at the moment. So I think this is a catalyst for change, and I think past trends won't necessarily be repeated as we move forward.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, because you're recommending, 50% usage is that the sports hall being used 2.5 days out of the 5 days a week, isn't it? So yeah, that's quite optimistic.
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. There were just 2 points I wanted to make. First of all, I think this is a real reminder to us as councillors as we have discussions about accepting capital funding, about the ongoing consequences and liabilities, sometimes 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line, and the risks that those grant-funded acceptances take. And my final point was just hopefully the £15,000 will find its way to provide good outcomes for children and young people through the academy. In any conversations we have, I think we'd like to make it clear that that money is funneled as effectively as it can do to improve educational outcomes for children.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford.
I agree with Councillor Marcus, I think it's a lot of money to lose, and it is here on page 101, paragraph 23, that the actual running of the cost of running the sports hall is 50,000 a year. And I don't know where 15,000 off that, that's the only, are you going to make up that money? It's really not going to pay for itself if this reduction goes through.
And that's my challenge for next year. So I'll take the challenge if members move this recommendation. I think we need to look at all costs. Those costs that are quoted there include caretaker costs and cleaning costs. But we do need to look at all of them, including how we can perhaps reapportion rates, as well as our lighting and gas bills. So all those costs need to be looked at as we move forward.
I would like to have seen that brought to this meeting.
Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'm assuming this budget variation won't take place until the school becomes an academy. So that could be the way things are going another 5 or 6 years.
Sorry, Councillor Sims.
I just wanted to reiterate what I said earlier on. If we don't put this through now, then at some point, maybe January, February, we will get back the proposal that we approve £15,000, because that's where the negotiations have got, really. There isn't going to be any movement, as far as I can gather, from the embryonic academy.
Thank you. Councillor Legg.
I hear what Councillor Sims is saying, that this is where the negotiations have come to. Now, it's my understanding that there's a strong feeling in the community since this sports hall was built that it was far too big and it was going to cost us a lot of money, and those people seem to be right. However, the school at the time, is my understanding at least, and perhaps people could clear things up, that the school insisted that it should be this big. Now, the academy is taking on the school, and yes, perhaps a school of this size on the mainland could get a similar deal for far cheaper, but the school as a business has to take on what commitments the previous business made, and a fair share, which would be presumably half of the annual running costs, seems only fair to me.
Thank you. Councillor Grottig.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I know historically there have been issues over the size of the facility. But on the other hand, I don't think we can go back in time and apportion blame now, because we're not fully in possession of all the facts. I think I wouldn't be so depressed as Councillor Watts to the time frame of the actual academisation process. I am assured by Aisling Khan that this is the final piece of the jigsaw. This is the end game. This is holding everything else up. And if that is so, I think we just have to regretfully accept that, to use that common phrase, we are where we are, and we have to find a way forward. As Nicholas said, they have compared the prices that they pay for the facility all over the United Kingdom. I know Councillor Marcus is shaking his head and he doesn't think that's relevant, but I would like to say to him, if that's what they're putting on the table and there really is no further room for manoeuvre, in all conscience, surely we have a duty to cooperate in law with the academisation process. And so I don't really see we've got any other alternative. I totally agree with you, it's regrettable. I would just say, to finish, that although there is apparently a loss of income from the school of 21,000 a year, the school struggled in the past to actually pay that. And at least on one occasion, we actually gave them some money from an education underspend, which incidentally the auditor didn't really approve. So it has caused issues in the past, and I think, as I said, I think we have to accept where we are.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Could I just confirm that the income from the solar panels on the roof of the sports hall flow into council coffers?
As I understand, it's a 50-50 split.
between the school.
So is that going to continue, or is that changing to us now?
It's been silent in discussions.
Can that be volume turned up on that a little bit?
Members would like to consider that as part of the recommendations.
Okay. So we can add to the recommendations then a paper to be brought back to council or delegation, depending on what we want. That.
Before we do that, could we just get an indication, how much are we talking, 50-50? Are we talking 50 quid or thousands? Okay.
Seven.
7,000.
So can we say...
Can I make a proposal? Clearly, the sports hall was developed and put in place as very much a community asset. And I think it's important for members that we assure that community use will continue to go into the future. Things have changed in the school. And so therefore, we're now moving to a position really where, although the school is very clearly a partner of the Isles of Scilly, they're also a separate business. And so therefore, the business model, if you like, between the way that the school is using the facilities is changing. And so therefore, in my personal view, is that the way it operates is very much almost like a pay-as-you-go. So the school have provided the times, the slots that they will need, exclusive use to the sports hall, and we're agreeing a fee for that. So therefore, the relationship is slightly different. And as the owners of the facility, or at least having the full lease, can I ask that the members recommend then that the senior manager for strategic development enters into a contractual arrangement with the school, on the proper terms, how, as a landlord, we will deal with a tenant, if you like. And then we can deal with issues such as cost and income that can be arrived from the sports hall in a much clearer and transparent way. And that will deal with solar panels.
Okay. Councillor Marcus, have you finished, or do you want to?
Sorry, I was just, the implications of that, I was just wondering about the community use agreement and whether that's the legal implications of this change. Are there any, or maybe that needs further work?
The community use agreement will be updated, and basically what the community use agreement is trying to establish is a minimum amount of community activities on that site. So the Sports England grant required that community use as part of the funding from Sports England. This will help that because it's increasing the number of community hours that are available for use. So it will be amended, but it'll be amended in favour of the community.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd firstly say, I think it's a well-written report, and I welcome the look at the business case for the sports hall. I think that's always a good thing. What I would note, though, is that this is a pretty big turnaround in position from the academy. From my understanding, they were looking to take on the sports hall, and now they're looking to rent it off us as a kind of long-term solution. So, I think that needs to be noted. And from my point of view, listening to all the discussion, I do feel we're being pressed into a position we don't want to particularly be in. And I think the budget pressure is very significant. And given the previous item on the agenda and our discussions there, I feel very, very challenged to support this position of actually dropping our income from the sports hall. And I'd like to see, I find that extremely challenging to vote through, to be quite honest.
Councillor Williams.
In response to Councillor Smith's comments, I guess maybe they changed their mind when they saw how much certain things cost to operate. But I would certainly think if we as the council are incurring all the costs, all the liabilities, it seems a bit generous to be giving half the income from the roof, which I guess technically belongs to us. I do take the point, though, we are in the end game of the academisation marathon, ultra marathon. And I would like to draw it to a conclusion. So I don't want us to end up dragging it on for another 4 or 5 months, alienating the academy and the DFE even further for the sake of that. But I think we just need to have a firm conversation about those expenses.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
I would like to make a proposal that we defer the decision today and wait for a report from our senior manager, how she's going to make up the shortfall.
Well, we have a previous proposal. First of all, Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 31 alludes to the fact that a consequence of not agreeing to this may result in the Department for Education suggesting that it could be transferred to the academy, but they don't want it. So either they get it or they don't get it. I'm just struggling to understand really the consequences of not approving this. I don't know if the monitoring officer could fill me in there a bit.
Well, I can try. So I think part of the problem has been that in the early stages of the negotiation on the academisation, it was assumed that the sports hall was within the premises that would automatically transfer to the school, and that was wrong. And so I think the change in position is in part due to the academy realising what the issue was, and in part due to officers actually taking a stance and saying, no, let's not assume it's a straight transfer of the sports hall. It's clearly an important community asset. The thing that occurs to me is that, and that's why I wrote that paragraph in the legal implications I did, is although the DFE can make directions to the local authority and the other parties involved with a view to bringing the academisation to a conclusion, and those directions can relate to the transfer of assets. I think the DFE is in a slightly difficult position on this one, because this isn't an asset, it's solely used by the school. And so, I mean, you could get your heels in and say, sorry, no, this isn't good enough. There is the risk then that there will be a direction from the DFE, but we don't know what that direction would be. But you need to be alert to the risk of there being a direction. So it's difficult for me to advise you what you should do. But one of the things you need to think about is your duty to the taxpayer. But I think in the context of facilitating the academisation, I don't think it would be unlawful for you to agree to the recommendations that are in the report. Otherwise, I would require them to hear it differently. So I think that's the best I can give you. But if there's anything else, please ask.
Thank you. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you, Chair. At the risk of repeating myself, at the risk of repeating myself, I would just like to draw members' attention again to the academisation order, which was received in November 2016, which is the report says clearly outlines the local authority's duty to take all reasonable steps to facilitate the making of academy arrangements with the sponsor. And this is part of that process.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. In reply to the Vice Chair, I would say the Council has taken all reasonable steps, but it also has to take all reasonable steps to protect its budget. And I think this is a very serious issue, and I'm still not convinced that this is the right path to follow, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Guy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just take on board what the monitoring officer says. We have a duty of care to the community, and £15,000 in my book is not enough.
Thank you. Okay, well, we have a proposal on the table to accept the recommendations and a seconder.
Was there another proposal as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So we have that proposal. We also have, I think, a proposal from yourself about a paper. Dan, is that right? Your proposal was for a paper?
It was to change the agreements for the solar panels. So someone help me here, please?
I think you were talking about the income from the solar, the FIT it's called, should be transferred to the council as part of this arrangement, rather than being shared 50-50 between the school and the council, which is the current arrangement.
Okay, so that's an additional proposal, that the income from the feed-in tariff is directly, completely transferred to the council rather than shared as a whole. And was there also something about the senior manager looking at the arrangement of being a landlord? Or?
Well, what I was suggesting is that members develop a proposal whereby they delegate authority to the senior manager for strategic development to enter into an agreement to clarify all those issues, so that the agreement is very clearly set out how the fee is arrived at, what it means for future increases for the fee, how it relates then to increases used by the school or decreases used by the school, including what it means in terms of the maintenance and upkeep, or the contribution from maintenance and upkeep, or the income coming forward from the panels.
Chairman, can I just mention a fact that it's the chief executive making that recommendation, not the members?
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm just
members develop.
Yeah.
So, but I would go with that wording, that first bit of that sentence, basically. The senior manager, we delegate to the senior manager in negotiation with the chief exec and the vice chair to clarify the relationship with the school and all users of the sports hall.
Councillor Sims.
I'm happy to append to the three recommendations that I proposed that solar panels and what the Chief Executive just said. I would be very reluctant to append Councillor Mumford's suggestion that we defer this until Nicola can come back with a firm business plan, costs, etc., because I don't think that would make any material difference to it. And also, if Nicola does do that, I'm assuming that she would have, it would be broadly the same cost-saving plans as we would get anyway, because it doesn't actually make a material difference to savings and costs at the sports hall.
So let's just be clear. So are we now suggesting that we're looking for a deferment until this further?
I'm very much not looking for a deferment.
I would.
So are you still proposing?
I'm still proposing that I am proposing all three of the recommendations.
Yes.
With the solar panels amendment, if you like, and the statement that the Chief Executive just made regarding the tenant-landlord agreement.
Just for clarity then, I think what you're saying is that you'll accept the recommendations subject to the additional condition first being met, which is that the benefits of the FIT be transferred to the council. So you're only accepting the other recommendations subject to that taking place.
And the proposal from the Chief Executive. I would, those five then recommendations, I would second.
Right. Okay. So we've got that recommendation, which is the three here, plus the solar panels and the tenant-landlord arrangement. And then we have a further proposal for deferment. So is that correct? Yeah.
No, I don't believe it is. I don't think that the proposal for deferment has been seconded.
First of all, Matt Stokes, please.
Hi, Chairman. Yeah, so certainly by listening to that, the proposal for deferment hasn't been seconded. If it is seconded, you need to take that one first.
Yeah.
If the vote on that is that it's supported, that then becomes the substantive motion. You then have to vote again as to whether that's going to be carried. If it's lost, then you're back to the original proposal. So I think the first thing to establish is whether there's a seconder for the motion or proposal to defer.
Thank you for that. So do we have a seconder, please, for the motion for deferment? that was proposed by Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, can we just clarify that the deferment with a report to come from the senior manager?
Yeah.
On income that can be made.
Okay.
More like a business case, really, before we actually take a vote on it.
So do I have a seconder
I'll
for that,
second that.
please? Okay. So first of all, we'll vote then that there is a deferment of this and that there will be a report to come from the officer. So all those in favour of a deferment with a report, please. It's 3. Okay, so that's lost. So, no.
You need to see who's against.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry? Okay, well, all right. Those against? Yeah. It's still lost. Thank you. I didn't think we'd have that many abstentions, but we will record abstentions if anybody wants them to abstain. No abstentions. Thank you. Right. So the recommendations then are approved with solar panels and no. You want to vote on that now, even though the other is lost? Okay, fine. Okay, no problem.
My proposal is to take all 5 in one vote.
Including the solar panels and the tenant landlord agreement. Fine. So we've got a proposer and seconder. All those in favour of those 5 recommendations, please. Right. Number 1, that members approve £15,000 plus VAT as the fee for the use of the Queen Elizabeth II Sports Hall by the Five Islands Academy for the 2019-20 financial year. Number 2, that members note that this will have an adverse impact on the council's budget for 2019-20 and will require additional savings to be identified in the budget setting process to mitigate the loss of income. Number 3, that members note that the fee for the use of the Queen Elizabeth Sports Hall by Five Islands Academy for 2018-19 is forecast to be £30,000, a reduction of £6,592 on the charge for 2017-18. Number 4, that the income from the solar panels will revert to the council. Item 5, that there will be a tenant landlord agreement drawn up by the senior officer. So now we have a proposer, and who was the seconder, please? Councillor Rogers. All those in favour? Five. Right, well, that's carried. Thank you. Okay, all right. Those against? 4. Those abstaining? 1. So it's carried. Thank you. Right, exhausting one. So item number 14 on the agenda, we have agreed to defer. However, there will be in approximately a fortnight's time a presentation from Nicola to brief members fully on the paper, which will be represented for the December full council. Item 15 on the agenda is also in the report of our senior manager, Nicola, on the council homes programme.
Thank you, Chairman. I did report back in February, I think, to the council regarding our ambitions around moving into the space of direct delivery. And I think this report now brings us up to date as to how those discussions have gone, where we are now, and what I think we need to do as we move forward. So I think the first question that we have to address in the report is why would the council move into direct delivery? Why would we not just sit in a reactive position and wait for development to come to us? And I think the first point I'd like to make is that if we look at the past trends in terms of delivery, we aren't receiving the supply of affordable homes that meets our need. So over the last 5 years, we've had 9 affordable homes, yet demand on the housing register is around about 50, 55 people, households at the moment. And so what that means is that our supply isn't keeping up with demand. And does that matter, I suppose, is the question. And it does, because it's acting not only as a constraint on services, so we heard of all the issues around Park House and being able to recruit staff. Part of that recruitment issue is around providing housing, but it's acting as a constraint on businesses and economic growth and investment too. So we're hearing from the private sector and the Island Partnership about some of their issues that are having around the growth within that sector. So why do it? I think it's because we can, and also because others aren't doing it. So in the last few months, we've been having discussions, and so we have been working with the Duchy and others to look at who might be our partners in delivering homes on for the allocated sites within the local plan. And what we've found is that the registered providers, that's the housing associations, have looked at the Isles of Scilly and have found that to be a too difficult proposition. So you've heard from government there's quite a lot of local funding available for social and affordable homes at the moment, but none of the registered providers have included the Isles of Scilly within their forward programme for business, because the sites just are either too small or too difficult, or the margins are too small for them to move forward on. So without a partner to deliver, it leaves us the option really of direct delivery, and that brings us to the recommendation 1 within the report, which is about us stepping into the space, if you like, where the market's not delivering, and saying, well, actually, who's going to make the first move here? Do we still wait? Do we just keep biding our time, or do we say, well, what could we do to be more proactive? And actually, by making that first move, we may then get partners come alongside us. So some of the issues I've raised in the report about if we start this process off, it is possible that other providers may come forward, and we may finish up with a joint venture or a partner, another registered provider, once we've de-risked this process. So, excuse me. I think one of the important things to establish at this stage is what is it that we're going to do? So what is it that we're talking about? So I set out at Appendix 8 what I've heard in terms of discussions with through the local planning and our discussions around housing delivery, what that vision is. And I think it's about the leadership in terms of housing delivery, whether that's us leading and directly developing, or that's supporting the private sector or individuals to deliver. So the vision I've set out in Appendix A is about that leadership role. And it's about, if we're going to do that, and what is the objectives, what is it we're trying to achieve? Is it just about increasing numbers, or is it about the quality of the homes as well? And is it about working with the community and making sure that we build the right size homes that meet the needs of the community? And what underpins all this, and I'm sure Russell will nudge me if I don't mention it, is that we can't do anything unless it's viable, and we've got a financially sustainable model too. So those aspirations are set out in the appendix, and I've asked at recommendation 2 that we sign those off at this stage as to exactly what we're trying to achieve. And that includes the scale of our ambition as well. So the scale of our ambition I've set as 30, because that seems to allow us a reasonable pace of delivery, but a chance to create an opportunity for that pent-up demand that's out there at the moment and isn't being met. 30 homes, I think, will take us 5 years to deliver. That sounds a long time, but in anything, when you're looking at sites and bringing them forward, by the time you've done your topographic surveys, your ecological surveys, your environmental studies, all those things take time. Run alongside that community engagement, a planning process, and site negotiations and potential acquisitions. Realistically, you're 2 years in the planning and 3 years in the building. So my suggestion to you is that we would probably take on a build programme, as set out here, of around 10 units a year after that 2-year preparation period. So I think in terms of scale of delivery, we're looking at improving that to 10 homes per year. That's set out in Appendix 3. Appendix 4 and 7 are interrelated. It's about what, if we're going to do this, it's going to cost us a little bit. There is a risk here. We are, in effect, taking upon ourselves development risk. And so we need to know what that risk is, and also how much it's going to cost us to get past go, if you like, to start doing some work around the suitability of the sites. So How would we fund it? So we have right to buy receipts, we have a housing reserve. We need to think about where we're going to take this money from. It's not the general reserve here. This will be housing reserve. Russell will correct me if I'm wrong. And that reserve is propped up by some right to buy sales. So in this financial year, well, in this calendar year, we've sold 3 right to buy properties and had receipts of just under £500,000. So we really ought to be reinvesting that into the delivery of affordable homes. So my suggestion at recommendation 4 is that the funding comes from that housing reserve, which is propped up by not only rental income from our tenants, but also from the sale of those existing properties. Recommendation 5, I'm talking about how we get this programme running. We could put all our eggs in one basket. We could just say, we've got the Carn Thomas Secondary School site, let's stick with that one and just put all our efforts into the delivery there. My only concern there, members, is the reason why those housing providers haven't come forward is they've all looked at that site and said, ooh, that's a bit tricky, that doesn't stack up financially, that viability does not work. And so when we discussed a programme approach in February, what I've suggested is that let's nail that here and suggest, would it work across 3 sites? So if we want to get as much affordable housing as possible, it probably wouldn't work if we just looked at the Carn Thomas site in isolation. We might not. I think the viability work that was done initially only showed a potential delivery of 15% of affordable homes on that site. Well, that's not going to meet our needs. So if we take a programme approach and look at some additional either site acquisitions or land swaps, then maybe that gives us a better chance of increasing the percentage of affordable housing delivery. And instead of looking at cross-subsidy, which is talked about in the local plan across a single site, let's look at cross-subsidy across a whole programme and see if we can up that percentage of affordable homes. And of course, if we do lead on this, that developer profit that most developers would expect to take, which is about 20%, will help us because actually we'll need to put a contingency in there, but maybe we won't be expecting to take a profit at that level, but it needs to be financially viable. That might mean the viability improves because you've taken off an element of profit that would have gone elsewhere. So we're trying to make it stack up. So the recommendations through from 4 to 7 are looking at what sites we take forward. They're all allocated and discussed in the local plan. So in terms of risk, there will be some developer risk. I think we manage that risk, particularly in terms of the community, by setting a good example in terms of engagement. And my experience to date has been if you can engage early with communities and if you can make sure that those people in need come to those community engagement events, then you get quite a rewarding experience. You can listen to concerns, you can deal with those concerns early, but you can also listen to those in housing need and hear their voice too. So I would expect to put some effort into that community engagement quite early in the process, thereby having a very iterative design process in terms of not only the layout of the sites, in terms of master planning, but in terms of house design as well. And I think what underpins our programme here is set out in that vision and objectives about sustainability. And when I talk about sustainability, it's not just about renewable energy, it's about the whole house costs and reducing costs and efficiency in terms of water usage too. So there's quite a lot of work streams that flow into this, and I do need some capacity to help me do this work. We have got some work done since February. It's been quite demanding to get it done in a normal working week, but I think if we want to up the pace and actually be serious about delivery, we do need to put some capacity in here to deliver it, both internal, which is to help me, assist me get the work done in terms of the governance, the process and commissioning work, but those external studies cost money as well. So when we start talking about designs, layouts, they have to be informed by ground surveys and site investigations. So if we want to be serious about this, we do have to put some money into it. And if it is a corporate priority, we need to make sure that we do it as effectively as possible with the right skills. We can try and bundle along and try and do it, but actually that sometimes costs more money in the long run because it leads to mistakes and a longer time scale. So the recommendations before you members today are to establish that programme, to get the groundwork ready to come back to you with any potential site acquisitions, and to start that community engagement process going alongside those negotiations for the sites listed. Any questions?
Thank you, Nicola. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome the report. I think it's really well written and I really like the approach, and I think it's very clearly laid out. It's very encouraging to I think for us as the council to be taking the lead on this, I think this is a big change in position, and I think that's right, actually. So thank you for that. I just wanted to, first of all, check a couple of things on process. I think, Chairman, you said that recommendation 4, we would, if we were minded to, only recommend in principle at present
that's
time.
correct.
And presumably, would we also then only be recommending in principle recommendation 7?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I will read the recommendations that have been altered when we've finished debating.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. In terms of the actual site choices, I'd just like to pick up on those. I did, which is on paragraph 55, I did cross-reference these with the SHLA, these wonderful acronyms we have. And I noticed that these two sites, although they scored highly, weren't actually the highest scores of the Old Town sites. And also, they were actually in the 6 to 10 year development rather than the 0 to 5 year development. So I wonder why those particular sites were chosen, please.
All right, so they are chosen for this first phase of the process to see if they are deliverable. So I always take that 5 to 10, 6 to 6 to 10 year range as something that we need to challenge because it's about what we can deliver. So the reason why they're chosen is Old Town's a good place in terms of community. We need to try and support that community, support the shop, support the pub. So it's a good focus. So it's which sites at Old Town do you think we should support? One of the sites we have garages on already. Those garages are going to need some repair and renovation. So as part, it makes sense to amalgamate these two sites together. In effect, we have a ransom strip potentially into that development land. So we've got some control over that site. The other site sits across the road from Enna House, and it's a possibility that would be one of the first schemes to come forward because in terms of the site constraints, there are limited site constraints there. So if we wanted to do something quickly, I've kept that in because I think that will be a quick one where you could use modular homes quite easily. So let's put the difficult ones in and let's put the easy ones in. So you've got a range there. You've got really tricky, Con Thomas. You've got probably the easiest site to develop if you're a developer and you've got a lovely greenfield site across from Enna House. And then you've got a mixed one, which is the one where we own the garages. And then you've got a slightly sloping site up the hill there. So there's some rationale to it, but that will be tested. And we may finish up with a completely different set of sites when we come back to once we've done that viability work. But I think it's about just finger in the air, what might look right, does it consolidate the existing settlement pattern, and they're all three quite different sites with different challenges that we need to explore.
Okay, so those arguments are all completely understandable. Just to look at the detail of recommendation 6 then, I understand those arguments. I just feel like we perhaps as members need a little bit more input into that process of selecting the sites. So is recommendation 6 essentially saying, right, those will be the sites and you will now negotiate with the Duchy release of those Old Town sites, or will there be another hoop before those are, actually kind of signed and sealed? Because it does impact then on the kind of the process of actually taking those forward to planning ultimately.
I think at some stage you've got to say, right, this is what we're going to do. So I've taken the local plan and the existing work that's been done and said, right, that's the range of sites that members have accepted already because they are being put forward as part of the local plan. We could procrastinate. We could explore every single site and do some site feasibility work on all of them. What I want to say today is that we need to make that decision. We need to decide where we're going to move, what sites we're going to move forward on. Part of that work's already been done, as you say, through the local plan process. My site selection is for the rationale that I've just suggested. Now, we might find when we start to do the due diligence that those sites are just not feasible. There may be underground services, there may be other things that we just don't know about yet, and we have to come back and put some more sites in. We might find the community come back and go, absolutely no way, we're going to stop this happening. And I think at that stage, we then get the next list of sites and have a look at the next ones. But I think you've got to make a decision about sites at some stage because otherwise we could just be sitting here in no man's land until such a time as somebody comes to us and offers us a site, and that's probably not going to happen.
I quite agree with you, and I know all that background work's been done. I mean, the fact is the SHLA and the local plan did identify a number of sites at Old Town. I'm not in favour of procrastination at all. I just think that it would be prudent for members to be absolutely behind you with the selection of those sites. So would suggest that that is taken forward to a workshop in the very near future to actually say, yes, these are the sites in Old Town, we are going to select X and Y for these reasons.
I also add perhaps then to the recommendation on 7 is that those negotiations and further report should also include an options appraisals of other sites or adjacent sites that are included within the SLA.
That would be acceptable to me, certainly.
Chairman, just a word of caution on that, because obviously the SLA is a document that's actually informed the local plan process. The local plan is the important document. That set out actually the specific allocations, providing certainty to the community and also ourselves as the local planning authority. And members have already identified from the SLA and the work we've been doing in the planning process, which sites should be specifically allocated. So what the senior manager of strategic development has done is actually selected those sites, which members have already agreed upon, that should be allocated within the local plan. And already we have been at the community consultation. So my view is actually the right sites have actually been identified in this report.
Well, that's all understood. I think it just, if we are selecting the first sites to be developed, I think they have to be absolutely the right ones. And I just think that there should be some member input into that. And that's really not me trying to slow the process down. It's trying to do it right.
I'm reading that as to say, why not the other allocated sites? And we'll cover that as part of that process.
Councillor Sims.
Well, I've seen, it's been my glory and my doom to see an awful lot of papers over the last 5.5 years, and I think this is possibly my favourite one. This is a great, great paper. Housing is, I could be corrected if I'm wrong, but I don't think we built any social housing in my entire term as a councillor, and this is the local plan made flash, and I think it's great, really, really positive, and there's lots of little, tricks is the wrong word, that implies trickery, but and it's like the pattern book of house designs. If we get the Duchy to approve the pattern book, that saves an awful lot of problems down the road with getting approvals and stopping everything. If we can do this in 5 years, it will be wonderful. You find a way forward to a problem that I was beginning to think was entirely intractable. There have been a number of comments on Facebook regarding this, quite legitimate questions. Firstly, what about water? And I just wanted to make it sort of clear that water is really a function of the visitor economy. It's not really down to locals. Another 60 odd people in houses over here are not going to impact on that significantly. And the other query was sewage. And I think we need to reiterate this over and over again. The local plan and what our aspirations to it are contingent on the infrastructure being in place, else it won't happen. So it's two parallel roads.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. I totally echo the previous comments. I really do welcome the can-do approach which is being proposed in this document, and hopefully that can manifest itself into other aspects of the corporate plan as we move forward. Anecdotally, and I've raised this in informals in the past, I keep seeming to hear the gap between local authority rent and private sector rent seems to be widening, exacerbated by 1% decreases, and I picked up on point 25 and 26, but that's something which needs to be looked at. I really do welcome the links between health and well-being and the determinants of good quality housing. I think that links in very carefully to what Health and Wellbeing Board discuss on a regular basis. And when we had the LGA representative over a week or two ago, she was talking about how her authority had transferred their entire housing stock into a 100% council arms reach company to protect against right to buy. And I know you just mentioned that there had been 3 this year, and I just wondered what your views on that mechanism were.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? And I think as quickly as local authorities are trying to work around the rules, the government are changing the rules as well. So when I worked at Cornwall Council, we also were trying to work around how we prevented right to buy because it just seemed an anomaly that we were losing stock at a rate greater than that which were being built. There is no easy answer. I think what's critical to this will be the legal advice that we seek as we find the right mechanism for delivery. So if we deliver them and we manage them, what are the implications? How can we get around that? I don't think there's an easy route. If we work with a partner, is that possible? So I think in the next stage of work, those options around how we deliver it and whether this creates an opportunity for shared responsibility or another partner who sits with us and holds the stock need to be explored. So there's no easy answer to right to buy. Everyone's trying to work around it. And at the moment, if it comes to us, we will have a right to buy on these properties that the tenants will benefit from. It's a conundrum. It's difficult to overcome. And as quickly as local authorities, as I say, are trying to find solutions, the government are changing the rules to make sure people do have the right to buy. So there are arguments for and against right to buy. I think what we need to do is make sure when we look at the tenancies that we propose on this, it's that we'd perhaps bring in some shared ownership so there is an opportunity for people to have a share of their property, and that might overcome some of the aspirations that people have for right to buy. But getting over that issue is quite difficult. I'm not sure whether Matt's got the answer to it, but certainly we will need some detailed legal advice as we go through this process.
Matt, have you anything to say on that?
Sorry, I suppose, no, I don't have the answer to it at the moment. But something I would just like to touch on is, I think it was mentioned earlier, some of these recommendations being supported in principle. I'm not sure that these supported in principle, because all you're doing at this stage, all the sort of this stage, is that statement of intent, a commitment to actually take the lead, and for some investigation of feasibility and negotiation to be done. So I think we can progress a little bit if you approve these recommendations in principle. I think you should approve these recommendations because, of course, you will be getting an annual report back, at which point you can commit to particular sites being acquired or developed, and then also answer the question that you'll be presented with is about how much you can add to the capital programme.
Thank you. Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo Joel's comments about rent and the gap, and it'd be really good if we could work towards something that's a bit more equitable for everyone involved, keep social housing for people that actually need social housing and charge people that can afford to pay more rent, which would then come back into the port. I like the idea of the Skelton report, a third of your income. That's what it should be across the board. I don't know what the legal framework is. I don't really care at the moment, but that's the idea that I would like to see. And that would get rid of some of the inequality that people feel when they're living next door to someone who's paying a lot less rent than they are, or a lot more. The paragraph 41, you talk about self-build and freeing up plots for self-build. When are we likely to see a report of that? Because I think that's a really good way of stimulating the local economy and getting people getting their own quick results there. Do you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, I was likely to have said December, but it's been such a horrendous month of work that I think it's going to be early in the new year.
Okay, that's brilliant. And also paragraph 78, we're looking at 6 million cost for 30 homes. So if I'm right, that's 200,000 a home. Is that expensive? Is that cheap? Is that...
Okay, so I think it'll cost more than that to build. I think the ones that were built in Cornwall were around about 200 without the additional costs that we have. So to me, this is going to be a little bit around a design challenge for those people in the market to say, what can you deliver that's affordable for the Isles of Scilly within these parameters? I think we will be able to get probably some grant in addition to that, but I think we've got to cut our cloth according to our means. So in terms of the size of the homes, they need to be affordable. But I think we are talking in the range of around about £200,000 per plot. We'll know better once we've gone through this process a little bit more. We are focusing on 1 and 2 bedroom units, so the footprints will be slightly smaller than my experience in Cornwall. But they aren't cheap to build. What we've got to then look at is the business model. When's the payback period? Can we get it to pay back over 30 or 40 years to make it a good and sound investment for the council? So we need to cut our cloth according to our means. I think it's a good guide, We won't know until we've been out and had a look at the market and done some soft market testing about potential costs. But certainly costs on the island are significantly higher than on the mainland. And we have to think about how we might box clever on that and whether we can use off-site construction as a possible way of reducing costs in some way.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point I'd like to make. It's not really related to this paper as such, but just that for members not to forget off-islands, there are significant housing challenges on the off-islands, and we may or may not be able to do much about it, but we need to be very mindful of that. And it's certainly very welcome for St Mary's, but yeah, remember the off-islands.
Thank you, Councillor Sims.
Just to make it more widely known, really, I'm not, is it the PPS, the Public Sector Loan Body? I think, yeah. Well, I think from what I've spoken to Nicola about this, now if you start the project and the interest rate is currently, I think, around 2.5%, but that's the interest rate for the entire life of the loan. So there is a distinct possibility in the next 5 years, 10 years that this will go up. So it's good to get your foot in the door while interest rates are still at an historic low.
Thank you. Nicola, apologies. I think I possibly cut you off about commenting on off-islands. Would you like?
The only point on the off-islands is that I would hope that this would be beneficial in that if we can develop a pattern book that's signed off by planning, by the Duchy, and by building regulations, and at least it simplifies the process for those self-builders that would like to build on the off-islands. So certainly I would like to see some benefits accrued to the off-islands, but the programme will be focused on the larger sites. The custom self-build, of course, will be across all islands.
Thank you. Right, we have, if there are no further questions at this stage, we do have 7 recommendations. Now, I think Matt is suggesting that we possibly stick with the original ones. Is that what you were saying just now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The point for me is that you don't need to approve them in principle, because your safety net here is that the feasibility work will be done, some negotiation will be done.
There is a change.
There's that suggestion in the workshop, and then you're going to get a report back to say, right, we're ready to press the go button, can we please? By the way, this is how much it's going to cost. So you've got that safety net there. You're going to get a good report back from Nicola at some point when she's ready to encourage the council to take the next step forward.
So do we have to incorporate that into the recommendations, that report, or is it in there? All right.
Yeah, yeah. No, I just, thank you for that, Matt. No, I just really was looking at possibly changing recommendation 4 and 7 in view of the fact that unfortunately this was a late paper, and I just didn't want to put pressure on you to be looking at the figures that were in here if you weren't ready to do that. Excuse me, okay, we'll have Councillor Grottick.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. I just wonder if we could have a quick comment from the 151 officer, because one of the reasons for discussing with the officer yesterday that we actually approved this in principle was that so that £200,000, which is a significant sum of money, could actually go through the normal budget process, which we're obviously just about to start. So that was my reason. That was our reasoning for doing it, and perhaps we could ask Russell to come in there, please. If he's comfortable with it, agreeing what the monitoring officer has justified, obviously, I'm sure we will all defer to that.
Yeah, obviously I did work with the monitoring officer on these recommendations, and you say the normal budget process, but this is a good process. You're having a clear, transparent request to spend the £200,000. Clear transparency is coming from the reserve. There is sufficient in the reserve. I'm comfortable with that, and if we are able to capitalise in the future, we could replenish the reserve. I'm happy with it.
And at the end of the day, regardless, the risk is mitigated by the fact that if we did have a problem halfway through the project, and when we still got the asset.
At the moment, I would say that this report is not giving the go to actually start building assets or acquiring assets. The 200,000 is to do the feasibility and the work up to that. If you then start getting into the process of either buying land or even going to the next stage, that will require further approvals.
Okay.
Of course.
Thank you. Well, if you're happy, would somebody like to make a proposition, please, that all 7 recommendations are approved? Councillor Sims, is that seconded by Councillor Mumford? All those in favour? It's carried. Any against? Abstentions? Thank you. Good. So item 16 on the agenda is appointment to the Scrutiny Committee. Report of the Officer for Policy and Scrutiny.
I'm happy to take this one, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
It's a relatively straightforward report. So the last Councillor Molson stood down from the Scrutiny Committee, so you've got a vacancy there, which we lately filled from whoever's not yet on the Scrutiny Committee. And the other thing to bear in mind, and this is coming from the recommendation, is that during June and July last year, when we looked at terms of reference and competition committees and what have you, we members changed standing order 24/4, I think it is, off the top of my head. So removing the restrictions on who could be on the Scrutiny Committee, by increasing the membership to 9. Now, removing the restrictions on who can be on the Scrutiny Committee is fine in my view, although I think there's still merit in the chairman and vice chairman of council not being on that committee within your elevated status. But the question is, do you want the DPP and the working group to look at that, to revisit that, to see whether actually you're content with that, or are you happy to maintain that standing order as is, but pragmatically apply principles when you're nominating members to the committee? So two relatively straightforward recommendations. I'll leave it at that, Chair, but have to answer questions.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, I would like to propose both recommendations. I think it would be good to go to the democratic process panel to discuss who can sit and who can't sit on the panel. I'd be quite happy to go with that. So I don't know if anybody wants to propose anybody to sit on the Scrutiny Committee.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, agree with what's been said. I'd like to propose Councillor Sims to stand for the Scrutiny Committee.
It's fine by me.
Okay.
Sort of.
Councillor Legg.
I'll second that proposal.
Okay. So, first of all, we ought to agree the recommendations.
I'll second those the recommendations as a whole.
Thank you. And you were proposing them, weren't you? Thank you. So, all those in favour of agreeing the recommendations? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Okay, so we now have a proposal that Councillor Sims be elected to the Scrutiny Committee, and we have a seconder for that as well. All those in favour? Any against? Thank you. And Councillor Sims is appointed. Right, now normally we would close the meeting after item 16, but we are today going to continue with part 2 items because members have asked to question these updates. So we'll take item 17, the water update, which I think is in the hands of Helen Pearce. Is that right, Senior Officer?
Chairman, all I was going to say is if we can take the report as read, and then both myself and the Senior Officer for Infrastructure
Thank
will
you. So
do we have any questions? Not ask questions.
Do we have any questions, please, for Helen and Craig on the water update, firstly? Councillor Marcus.
Helen, thank you very much for waiting all this time. On paragraph 5 on page 110, we've got the average usage per day of the average winter usage. So this isn't including tourists. At the bottom of the page there, 200 litres a day, and the average national average is 162 litres a day.
Yes.
Why do people use more water on the Isles of Scilly than in the UK as a
I
whole?
don't know. Why do you use more water?
I'm asking you as the officer. Are there more leaks? Are there?
No, we don't have the answer to that. It's a behavioural thing, I think, more than anything else. And that is just a piece of work that we're going to have to do around asking, enlightening people and empowering them to reduce their water usage. But there's no one answer to that, I'm afraid.
Okay. Chairman, one thing we do know in discussions with South West Water is that once you have meters in domestic properties, consumption probably goes down by about 30%. So I think the Water Industry Act has probably had quite a profound impact in terms of average consumption.
Can I just say that that's the comparison between two like for like, so it's non-metered and non-metered. So that's a direct comparison.
Apologies.
So the message is that people need to use less water generally. Okay. Also on the next page, table 6. That consumption went up massively between 1516 and 1617 from 172,000 cubic meters to 189. Do you know what the...
It could have been a particularly busy summer in terms of tourism. It could have been particularly dry that summer, so people used more. It could have been a period of time where there was a large construction project or a particular demand we may have had. And one of the big uses of water is if there's a fire shout, and that gets through a huge amount of water in one hit. So there's a lot of different reasons why you could see that peak. Usually it will be that there is we've got a population or tourist increase.
But even if, okay, it'd be really good to see if we could see some work on, we've got the summer usage, so the year-round usage as well, just to see the pressure.
We do have year-round usage data, so it gets published every, in the summer I do it every week, so that you can see what the usage is and you look backwards. And then we do sort of regular winter, summer, autumn updates.
That'd be great.
But I think it's important to remember that there is that information in isolation isn't that information in isolation isn't necessarily totally beneficial. You need to have a look at the other factors. Was it a dry week or was Easter early that year, or there's lots of different things that are in there. So I think the data in itself is only as useful as the context in which it sits.
Councillor Sims, please.
Regarding us using a lot more water than people on the mainland, and I appreciate that it is weighted to reflect like we'd like. However, I would suggest one possible reason on it is lots of people who have unmetered water on the mainland have previously lived in houses which were metered. So there's possibly a culture of having water metered on the mainland, even if you actually haven't currently got a metered house, which could go some way to explain what is a sort of quite an odd statistical anomaly.
Councillor Legg.
Yeah, first of all, on the usage per day, I was shocked by that. Certainly on the off islands, we know about scarcity of water, and I was so surprised that it was so much higher. But yeah, without more work, we can't tell what the reasons for that are. I'm interested that we've now got some equipment from South West Water to monitor the levels in the boreholes. Could we share that? Could we view that data as it's been, can't think of the word, processed? Because I think it would be very useful for people to see that actually in the summer, when even if we have a lot of rain, it doesn't necessarily get into the ground. My understanding is that whilst the plants have a lot of sunlight, they absorb a lot more water. At the minute, we've had a lot of rain, but we don't actually know how much of that's getting into the boreholes, so it'd be interesting to know that.
So I think that there's some theoretical modelling has been done. I think Julian Pearce is an excellent person to talk to if you ever get 5 minutes to ask him about it. But but he, I think that about 30% of the rainfall will end up in the aquifer eventually. But it takes a long time to get there. So when the monitoring data was last sort of sucked out of their little gadgets that they have, which I think was in October, despite the fact we'd had some rainfall at that point, not a huge amount, but some, the borehole levels were still dropping. So I think that's really worth people bearing in mind. I think the next lot of data should be released fairly shortly, but it does belong to South West Water, so I would need to sort of ask their permission in how we share it, and also think about much the same as we look at we've discussed the consumption data sitting in isolation, making sure that when we present that data publicly or with members, that we're really making sure that the right people are understanding it properly and that we're getting the right response to that. But theoretically, I'm sure that's fine.
Just coming back on that, I mean, I completely agree that, yeah, you have to be careful how data is portrayed. It's so often misused in our society. I mean, I think of water as I think of money. I look at my bank balance, and if it's going down, then I know I've got to save money and tighten my belt. To hear that our water levels in our boreholes is still going down means we still have to stop using so much water.
I absolutely agree. One thing I think is worth noting is since the last week of October, the water usage has come down dramatically. So we're less than half that of what we were in the middle of the summer. So that really goes to show the huge impact that the tourist season has on our water supplies, and that the resident population in itself the impact isn't huge. It is that influx of tourism that really has that huge pressure on the system.
Thank you, Councillor Sims.
With respect to data about levels, that's not really data about volumes, because it's really like judging the amount of water in a sponge. So it doesn't really tell us how much water is in there, given the nature of the aquifer. And I do think it's been a really good wake-up call this summer. I think the utility of it is that people need to be aware of how much water they're using, and I think that's a message we need to keep going, irrespective of how much rain we have. We probably had more rain yesterday. It physically landed on the islands, and we could use in 10 years. But so that's the message really. Going forward, we need to be saving water, and levels do not indicate volume.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think, I'd certainly like to echo in the report the praise to the water team, everyone involved for, doing a great job this summer of actually keeping the water running. I think there's some interesting stuff in here to look at. I think, like other people, I was kind of a bit shocked by our per head usage. And, I think clearly tourism does have a massive impact on water, but perhaps actually, we're sort of maybe as residents not taking our full responsibility there in terms of our per head of water use. I'd actually sort of flag up to members that I think I'd like to use this exercise that we've done over the summer, which I think has pushed out some really good messages, to actually develop some sort of Scilly water pledge that everybody, whether they're living or visiting on Scilly, this is what the expectation is in terms of water use, and how the water providers, be that council, Duchy or Tresco or other private providers, actually do to minimise their losses and to help the whole situation. So I think it'd be good to take a kind of island-wide approach to help minimise our water use in general. That's just a suggestion for now.
Thank you. If we don't have any more questions on water, I'd like to move on swiftly, please, because of time, to waste and recycling report. Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Sims.
Well, I just wanted to reiterate what I said in the beginning, that we're nearing, well, we'll probably never get to the end of the road on this, but we're very close to where we want to be, and it's been a long, torturous process since 2013, and well done to everybody involved in it.
Councillor Smith.
Question to Councillor Sims: where do we want to be?
Well, we don't want to be reducing any waste whatsoever. That's the cheapest option, isn't it?
I did have a question actually to the officer really in terms of, is 50% achievable? Because we've made really good progress and Hugh-Town's about to come online. Rates have changed a lot.
I think that it's worth bearing in mind that we're moving on to the next sort of fraction that we're ticking off the list is a light fraction. So whilst dry mixed recycling is bulky, it tends to be mostly plastic. And so I would caution members to manage your expectations as to the impact that this will have on our diversion rate, because our diversion rate is about tonnage. So whilst we might be removing bulk from our residual, it may not reflect so meaningfully in that percentage increase. So that would be my response on that one. I think the next big win for us will be to try and start removing organic waste from the waste stream, and that will see, I think in terms of that, again, volume-wise, it might even be less than that dry mixed recycling, but you will see a bigger impact on the tonnages, and there could be a beneficial byproduct from that as well. So I think that's where we want to get to next, Councillor Sims.
Yeah, that's good. It may be a useful, it may be a useful idea to, if we can, incorporate volume, because then you could probably get it up to 80% very quickly without doing much at all.
If I fill it all with air, in massive bags, then I think that will be worthwhile. Otherwise, volume's hard to judge because it depends about compaction rates, and we compact that. So I'm sure I can help there.
That perhaps the community could do with clarification of, cardboard boxes, there's an awful lot of packaging over here, and they will have to be dealt with differently. I understand that huge piles of cardboard boxes, and I do this like everybody else does. You put them outside, they come and collect it. That's not going to happen anymore, is it? And if there may well be some issues with the community, but it's my understanding that this is the situation on the mainland as well.
Yeah, so side waste isn't collected on the mainland, so that's really the issue. But it's going to tend to be more the sort of cardboard boxes that you can't put in your dry mixed recycling sack. The waste site will continue to be open on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons for people to take their oversized boxes. That's things like TV boxes or Amazon boxes that can't be repurposed, bike boxes, that sort of thing. We're looking to trial Saturday openings on to see how popular or in demand they are and whether or not that can offset some of the issues there. But again, there will be a long-term cost to that members will need to have a think about. But yeah.
Yeah, and there is, there may be some people who get televisions and washing machines delivered every week to their house, but you could actually spread it out over 3 weeks and chop it up a bit and put it in the bag. So I don't think it's an insurmountable problem, but some people will have issues with it. That's why I brought it up.
Thank you. From the chair, I would like to suggest that we make more effort with the cardboard. I'm a little bit embarrassed that we seem to be given an example by Tresco, which hurts me a little bit because I feel that we should be doing this ourselves. I understand that they wrap clean cardboard, seal it, and they can now send it away directly on the steamship for less than £100 a tonne, and we're sending it away £300 a tonne. And businesses are being charged the equivalent of £440 a tonne. So I just don't understand the economics of that and why we can't make more an effort, because I understand that cardboard is nearly 25% of our waste. You know, if we separate it out, it's 25%. So there's a massive saving there.
I don't think that there's any waste composition data to support that 25% figure, but it's a sizable amount in there. We will be looking to segregate cardboard entirely separately and to look to make the savings that way. At the moment, the cost to the commercial waste provider includes all of our staffing costs as well. So we have to pass those on. £440 a tonne, I don't think is accurate. That's for residual waste. Dry mixed recycling, of which cardboard will be in there, is a reduced gate fee to that. So it is a saving on the residual. And once we've got the dry mix recycling collection in place, we will be looking to introduce a segregated cardboard service as well. I expect that the cost of that will be significantly lower, but again, we have to, we're just trying to do things one thing at a time, do one thing well, and then move on to the next one. So it's certainly in the plan to get cardboard in the system. I think we might have discussed that before. We're just not quite ready yet.
Okay, but I just would feel that actually our community will help in this a little bit as well. I'm not expecting the council to sort of pick up on all of this, but the fact is if we give instruction to the community of how to deal with their cardboard, if you like, and help in this as well, so that we can actually have clean cardboard, we can seal it and send it away. You know, if it's not 25%, that's what it is on Tresco. It's certainly between 20 and 25% of the total rubbish. And
I don't think it is, but I accept that there is a, you know, it's enough of a proportion. There's enough volume coming through that it's worth our while to have it as a separate fraction. But I think at the moment it is included in the dry mixed recycling, so it's not going to residual. And at some point, once we've established that new route, we will be able to have that cardboard separately as well. But again, that will be a capital investment that will have to come through council, because we'll require the purchase of a baler and of the kit and equipment around that. It will be palletised rather than in the skips. So there will be other implications for members to have to agree on before we can proceed with that, unless...
Well, I'd be happy for a paper to come back to council, but it seems to me to be a no-brainer. So I think we should seriously look at it, please.
I can assure you it has been looked at and plans are afoot. We know exactly what we need to do. It's just a matter of being able to do one thing at a time so that we things don't fall apart.
Okay, and there's nothing stopping people from bringing their cardboard directly actually to the waste site itself, as Helen's already said.
It's just that we have so much on Scilly. Every single thing that arrives nearly on Scilly is wrapped in cardboard. You know, there's so much of it. It can be, it's a significant part of our waste structure. So anyway, thank you for that. On that note, unless there's any other questions, I will close the meeting at 12:25. Thank you.